In this video, we're breaking down 3 hours of Simpsons mysteries and theories. Let's get started. Starting it off with Homer's coma and the theory that the entire show is a dying man's dream. On October 8th, 1992, The Simpsons aired an episode called Homer the Heretic. It was Season 4, Episode 3. In that episode, Homer decides to skip church, nearly dies in a house fire because of his own negligence, and then has a conversation with God. Not a metaphorical conversation, not a dream sequence. An actual face-to-face sit-down with the Almighty, rendered in full animation, standing in a white void, where Homer J. Simpson asks the creator of the universe the meaning of life. God's response is interesting. He tells Homer that he'll find out the meaning of life when he dies. Homer, being Homer, says he can't wait that long, and God, without hesitation, replies with 6 words that change everything about this show if you're paying attention. You can't wait 6 months? That line gets a laugh. It's a joke. It's God being sarcastic, or maybe prophetic, or maybe just filling dead air with a punchline. The episode moves on. Homer goes back to church. Credits roll. Nobody thinks twice about it. But somebody should have been counting the days, because exactly 6 months later, on April 1st, 1993, The Simpsons aired Season 4, Episode 18. It was called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. And in that episode, Bart plays an April Fool's prank on Homer by shaking up a can of beer in a paint mixer at the hardware store. When Homer opens the can, it doesn't just spray, it detonates. The explosion is so violent it puts Homer in the hospital. But that's not what puts him in the coma. While recovering at Springfield General Hospital, Homer spots a candy vending machine on the other side of the room. He gets out of bed, stumbles over to it, and tries to shake the machine to get the candy out. The machine tips over, it lands on top of him. Chocolate bars pour into his open mouth as the weight of the machine crushes his body. Homer Simpson enters a coma. He is unconscious, unresponsive, and brain damaged. The doctors confirm he lost 5% of his brain function. His family gathers around his hospital bed. Mr. Burns tries to pull the plug on his life support to save money on the company health plan. Barney tries to smother Homer with a pillow in a direct parody of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And then, at the very end of the episode, Bart tearfully confesses that his prank is what started all of this, and Homer wakes up. He strangles Bart. Everyone laughs. The family tells Homer he's been in a coma for 7 weeks. He doesn't seem concerned. Nobody does. And the next episode plays like nothing happened. But here's the theory. What if Homer never woke up? What if that scene at the end, the one where he strangles Bart and everything goes back to normal, is the first hallucination of a man whose brain will spend the next 30 years generating increasingly elaborate fantasies while his body lies motionless in a hospital bed? Because if you accept that premise, if you follow the logic of God's 6-month warning through to its natural conclusion, then every single episode of The Simpsons that has aired since April of 1993 is not a television show. It's a coma dream. And the evidence supporting this isn't hidden in obscure background details. It's woven into the structural DNA of the series, in ways that the writers themselves have been forced to address publicly. Let's start with the tonal shift, because this is what first attracted attention to the theory. Before Homer's coma in Season 4, The Simpsons was a grounded show about a working-class American family dealing with recognizable, relatable problems. Bart cheats on a test in Bart the Genius. Lisa develops a crush on her substitute teacher in Lisa's Substitute. Homer and Marge face real marital strain in episodes that treat their relationship with genuine emotional weight. The comedy was sharp, but the world obeyed basic rules. People aged, consequences persisted. Springfield felt like a real place populated by people who behaved, for the most part, like actual human beings. After the coma episode, the show begins to accelerate in ways that don't make sense if you assume Homer woke up, but make perfect sense if you accept that a man with 5% brain damage is generating increasingly unstable fantasies from a hospital bed. Homer goes to outer space in Deep Space Homer. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer works for a Bond villain named Hank Scorpio, who owns a doomsday device, and gives Homer the Denver Broncos as a parting gift. Homer bowls a perfect game. Homer forms a Grammy-winning barbershop quartet called the B Sharps that achieves Beatles-level fame and then disbands, and nobody in Springfield ever mentions it again. Homer discovers a secret society called the Stonecutters that controls the world, becomes their messiah, and then everything resets. None of these things happened before the coma. All of them happened after. The Reddit user who popularized this theory, a person operating under the username HardTopic, posted it in February 2015. Within days, it went viral. It made the front page of Yahoo. It was covered by news outlets in Australia, Belgium, and across Europe. TMZ literally tracked down Al Jean, the longest-serving showrunner in Simpsons history, and asked him directly if Homer has been in a coma for 20 years. Gene's response was careful. He called the theory intriguing but false, but he didn't explain why it was false. He didn't point to specific episodes that contradicted it. He just said he didn't agree with it. And then, nearly a decade later, in a season 34 episode, The Simpsons themselves addressed the theory directly. They included a fake, deleted scene that depicted Homer in a coma, surrounded by his family, dreaming the entire series. They played it as a joke. They presented it as a parody of fan theories. But the fact that they acknowledged it at all tells you everything you need to know about how seriously the creative team takes this idea. You don't parody something that doesn't bother you. Now let's talk about the aging problem, because this is where the theory stops being a fun thought experiment and starts feeling genuinely uncomfortable. Bart Simpson is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old since 1989. Lisa is 8, Maggie is 1, Homer is somewhere between 36 and 40, depending on which episode you're watching. The show has been running for 37 seasons. Over 800 episodes have aired. More than 35 real-world years have passed, and nobody in Springfield has aged a single day. The show's official explanation for this is something called a floating timeline. Characters don't age because the show isn't meant to operate on a linear temporal axis. Each episode exists in a kind of perpetual present tense where the year is always now, but the characters remain fixed at their established ages. The writers periodically re-anchor flashbacks to newer decades to keep the show feeling current. Homer and Marge's teenage years have been relocated from the 1970s to the 1990s in more recent episodes, which means their entire romantic history gets rewritten every decade or so to avoid acknowledging that they should be in their 60s by now. The floating timeline is a narrative convenience. Every long-running animated show uses some version of it, but the coma theory reframes the floating timeline as something far more sinister. Homer remembers his family as they were on the day he lost consciousness. Bart will always be 10 because Homer last saw Bart at 10. Lisa will always be 8 because that's the Lisa who exists in Homer's final waking memory. Maggie will always be a baby because Homer's brain cannot imagine her growing up. He knows on some subconscious level that time is passing. His mind updates cultural references to reflect what he hears from the television playing in his hospital room or from conversations his family has during their visits to his bedside. But the people themselves, the faces, the voices, the ages, those are locked. They're snapshots from April 1st, 1993, frozen in amber inside a mind that can't let go of the last reality it knew. And then there are the celebrity cameos, which started increasing dramatically after the coma episode. People in comas can sometimes hear what's happening around them. Medical literature has documented cases of comatose patients who absorbed entire conversations, news broadcasts, and television programs without showing any external signs of awareness. If Homer's family visits him at the hospital and the TV in his room is playing, and nurses are discussing current events, then Homer's brain would process all of that information and incorporate it into his coma dream. Every celebrity who appears in The Simpsons after season 4, episode 18 could be Homer's brain generating dream versions of voices he heard while unconscious. When Tony Hawk shows up, it's because someone mentioned skateboarding in the hospital. When Lady Gaga appears, it's because a nurse was playing her music during a shift change. When Elon Musk visits Springfield, it's because a news broadcast about Tesla was playing on the waiting room television one floor down. None of these people are really there. They're just data points being assembled into characters by a brain that desperately needs to keep the dream going. There's one more detail that most people miss when discussing this theory, and it might be the most disturbing one of all. In Homer the Heretic, the episode where God tells Homer he has 6 months to live, God is drawn with only 4 fingers. Now, in The Simpsons, every character has 4 fingers. That's the standard animation style. But God is specifically noted by fans as one of the only characters who should have 5 fingers because he's supposed to be distinct from the rest of the cast. He's God. He exists outside the rules of Springfield, and in fact, in other episodes where God appears, he is drawn with 5 fingers. But in Homer the Heretic, in the specific scene where he tells Homer he will die in 6 months, God has 4 fingers, meaning he's drawn like every other character, meaning he's not actually God. He's Homer's subconscious, wearing God as a costume, telling Homer a truth that his waking mind isn't ready to accept. Homer didn't talk to God that night. He talked to himself. And his own mind told him clearly and without ambiguity that he had 6 months left. 6 months later, a vending machine fell on him, and Homer J. Simpson, the real Homer, the one who existed in the grounded, relatable, pre-season 5 version of The Simpsons, ceased to exist. What replaced him is a dream, a sprawling, chaotic, increasingly surreal dream that has now lasted longer than most people's actual lives. And every time you watch a new episode, every time Homer survives something that should kill him, every time the show introduces a plot so absurd that it couldn't possibly happen in any recognizable version of reality, you're not watching a sitcom. You're watching the fading neural activity of a man who has been lying in a hospital bed for over 30 years, his brain generating one last flickering fantasy before the lights finally go out. Al Jean says it's not true. The writers say it's a coincidence. The show itself has parodied the theory to distance itself from the implications. But none of them have ever explained why God told Homer he would die in 6 months, and then, 6 months later, Homer was crushed by a vending machine and put into a coma that he recovered from suspiciously quickly with no lasting consequences. None of them have explained why the show's tone shifted so dramatically after that specific episode. None of them have explained why the characters stopped aging at exactly that moment. And none of them have explained why, after more than 800 episodes, The Simpsons has never once depicted Homer dealing with the long-term neurological effects of losing 5% of his brain. Because you can't address something that's still happening. You can't show the damage if the damage is the show. Homer Simpson has been in a coma since April 1st, 1993. And every Sunday night, when a new episode airs, his dream gets a little bigger, a little stranger, a little further from the reality he left behind. And somewhere in Springfield General Hospital, in a room nobody visits anymore, a man with a round yellow face is lying perfectly still, dreaming of the family he'll never see again. And the dream won't stop until his brain does. And based on the show's renewal through season 40, that won't be anytime soon, because as long as someone is watching, Homer keeps dreaming, and as long as Homer keeps dreaming, The Simpsons never ends. Not because the show is popular, but because the coma hasn't killed him yet. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Springfield's location and why the show has spent 37 seasons making sure you never find it. Here's something that most casual viewers never think about, but once you notice it, you can't stop seeing it. Nobody knows where Springfield is, not the viewers, not the characters, not even the creator of the show. And that's not an accident or an oversight. It's the single most elaborate ongoing joke in television history, running for over 3 decades, involving hundreds of contradictory clues planted across 800 episodes, designed specifically to make the question unanswerable. But what if it's not a joke at all? What if Springfield's location is unknowable because Springfield doesn't exist in any fixed location? What if the town moves? Let's start with what we actually know, because the real-world history of this question is almost as weird as the fictional one. In April of 2012, Matt Groening sat down with Smithsonian Magazine for a career retrospective interview. During that conversation, the interviewer asked Groening directly about Springfield's location. And for the first time in the show's history, Groening appeared to give a straight answer. He said that Springfield was named after Springfield, Oregon, a small town near his hometown of Portland. He explained that as a kid, he watched a 1950s sitcom called Father Knows Best, which was set in a fictional Springfield, and he assumed it was the Springfield near Portland. When he grew up and realized the show's Springfield was made up, he liked the name enough to use it for The Simpsons. He said he figured that since Springfield is one of the most common city names in America, everyone would think it was their Springfield. This should have settled the debate forever. The creator of the show gave a clear, specific answer to a question fans had been asking for 23 years. Case closed. Except it wasn't, because within days of the interview being published, Groening's own colleague started undermining his answer. Al Jean, the showrunner, told reporters that the magazine misinterpreted something I've heard him say for at least 10 or 20 years. The Associated Press noted that Groening had a long history of giving deliberately fake answers about Springfield's location, and that this latest revelation could itself be another misdirection. And the following Sunday, the show's chalkboard gag had Bart writing a pointed message for the audience. The true location of Springfield is in any state but yours. So even after Groening's apparent confession, the official position remains that Springfield exists nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. But the evidence the show has planted over the years goes far beyond simple ambiguity. The contradictions are so specific, so mathematically impossible, that they can't be explained by carelessness or inconsistent writing. Someone is actively building a geographical paradox, and they've been doing it for decades. In the Simpsons movie, released in 2007, Ned Flanders tells Bart that the state where Springfield is located borders Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky. Let's think about that for a second. Ohio and Kentucky do share a border. That checks out. But Nevada is roughly 2,000 miles west of Ohio, and Maine is roughly 800 miles northeast of it. No state in the United States borders all four of those states. It's geometrically impossible. The show isn't being vague about Springfield's location, it's being specifically, deliberately impossible. It's placing Springfield in a state that cannot exist within the physical geography of the United States. And this isn't a one-time joke. The show does this constantly. In the episode Behind the Laughter, a season 12 mockumentary about the Simpson family, the narrator refers to them as a Northern Kentucky family in the original Fox broadcast. When the episode was rerun on the network, that line was changed to Southern Missouri family. Multiple alternate recordings were made and rotated through various airings, including versions that placed The Simpsons in western Oregon, eastern Nebraska, southern Illinois, and on the small island of Lanai in Hawaii. The producers recorded at least 6 different state designations for a single episode, with the explicit intention that the answer would change every time the episode aired. The phone evidence is even stranger. Springfield's area code has been shown as 636, which corresponds to St. Charles County in western St. Louis County, Missouri. But it's also been shown as 939, which is a Puerto Rico area code. Springfield's zip code, telephone exchange, and congressional district all shift between episodes. The state abbreviation has appeared as NT and TA in different shots, which animator David Silverman half-jokingly claims stands for North Tacoma, a fictional state that has never been confirmed by any showrunner or canonical episode. Character names provide the strongest link to any real place, and that place is Portland, Oregon. Flanders, Kearney, Lovejoy, Quimby, Terwilliger, and Burnside are all street names in Portland. Groening confirmed in his Smithsonian interview that he originally planned to name every character after Portland streets, but abandoned the idea because the production schedule was too hectic. The Simpsons live at 742 Evergreen Terrace, and there is an Evergreen Terrace in Portland. Groening's childhood home was on that street. When he visited Springfield, Oregon before the movie premiere in 2007, he left a signed plaque at the city's visitor center that read, "Yo to Springfield, Oregon, the real Springfield. Your pal, Matt Groening, proud Oregonian." So the character names are Portland. The town name is Springfield, Oregon. But the climate, geography, and cultural identity of Springfield in the show don't match Oregon at all. Springfield has a desert. It has an ocean. It has mountains. It has a gorge. It borders a state that doesn't exist. Its weather shifts from tropical to Arctic between episodes. It has a harbor, a port, a national forest, a tire fire that burns perpetually, a nuclear power plant, and an abandoned mine. No single location in America has all of these features. The physical layout of the town changes every time the animators need it to. Streets appear and disappear, neighborhoods relocate. The power plant shifts from the east side of town to the west side between seasons. The Simpsons house, which should be in a fixed location at 742 Evergreen Terrace, has had its front door, driveway, garage, and neighboring properties rearranged dozens of times. The nuclear power plant's design was rumored to be based on the Trojan nuclear power plant near Portland, Oregon, which was a troubled facility that closed in 1993 due to structural defects. There are also comparisons to the Hanford site in southeastern Washington, one of the most contaminated nuclear sites in the Western Hemisphere. Both of these are Pacific Northwest facilities, which supports the Oregon connection. But the show has also placed the power plant near a river, near a lake, near the ocean, and in the middle of a desert, depending on what the plot requires. Here's where the conspiracy angle takes shape. What if Springfield's unknowable location isn't a joke? What if, within the internal logic of the show, Springfield actually occupies an impossible geographical position? The town sits at the intersection of every American state simultaneously. It borders impossible combinations of states. Its climate changes on a scene-by-scene basis. Its physical layout rearranges itself like the hallways of a dream. The characters never leave Springfield permanently because there's nowhere else to go. The town is the universe. Everything outside of it is undefined, inconsistent, subject to change without notice. If you combine this with the Homer coma theory from our first segment, the explanation is elegant. Springfield doesn't have a fixed location because it exists inside Homer's brain. He vaguely remembers the geography of his life, the Portland street names from Groening's real childhood, the Oregon connection from Groening's actual biography, but the details are fuzzy, contradictory, and unstable. Homer knows Springfield has a power plant because he works at one. He knows it has a bar because he drinks at one. He knows it has a school because his kids attend one. But he can't remember exactly where these things are in relation to each other because he's been unconscious for 30 years and his spatial memory is degrading. Every episode, the map redraws itself because the dreamer can't hold the geography steady. And if you reject the coma theory, if you insist on treating the show as a reality where these characters actually exist and live and breathe and function, then Springfield's unknowable location becomes something else entirely. It becomes a containment field, a spatial anomaly that prevents anyone from mapping the town, locating it on a grid, or confirming its existence from outside. The characters can leave Springfield, but they always come back. Outsiders can visit, but they can never quite describe where they went. The town exists. People live there, babies are born there, people die there. But it occupies no fixed point in space, appears on no authoritative map, and refuses to be pinned down by any system of measurement that human beings have devised. Matt Groening himself seems to understand this on some level. When asked why he hid the location for so long, he said, "I don't want to ruin it for people." But what exactly would be ruined? If Springfield is in Oregon, who cares? It's a cartoon. The answer wouldn't change anything about how people watch the show, unless the answer is in Oregon. Unless there is no answer, unless Springfield's mystery isn't a marketing gimmick but a fundamental property of the show's reality, as essential to its existence as Homer's yellow skin or Bart's spiked hair. Springfield isn't hidden, Springfield is hiding. And after 37 seasons, 800 episodes, and every cartographic clue the writers could possibly plant, nobody has found it, because it doesn't want to be found, and maybe that should worry us more than it does. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Mr. Burns and the theory that he is not merely old, but functionally immortal. Charles Montgomery Plantagenet Schicklgruber Burns is, by the show's own admission, the oldest resident of Springfield. His exact age is a running joke that the writers have never bothered to resolve, and for good reason. Because if you actually trace the biographical details the show has provided across 37 seasons, you don't land on a man in his 90s or even his hundreds. You land on someone who has been alive since before the American Civil War, who has personally witnessed events spanning 3 centuries, and whose continued existence defies not just medicine but basic biology. And the show doesn't hide this. It puts it right in front of you over and over again, season after season, daring you to add up the numbers and realize that something about this man doesn't make sense. Let's start with what the show tells us directly. Burns has referenced personal memories from the 1860s, the 1880s, the early 1900s, and every subsequent decade up to the present day. He has described events from the Lincoln administration with the familiarity of someone who was there. He has told stories about working in 19th century industry, about meeting historical figures who died before the invention of radio, about participating in events that predate the modern nation-state. In one episode, he recalls his childhood as something that happened in the era of horse-drawn carriages and gas lamps. In another, he describes his college years as overlapping with World War I. In yet another, he references the Great Depression not as history, but as a personal financial setback that he experienced firsthand and from which he still hasn't recovered. His stock portfolio tells the story most clearly. In the episode where Burns loses his fortune, which is confirmed in the show's canonical record, it's revealed that Burns hasn't checked his stock portfolio since just before the 1929 crash. He has investments in transatlantic Zeppelins, Amalgamated Spats, Congreve's Inflammable Powders, U.S. Hay, and the Baltimore Opera Hat Company. These aren't joke investments. These are historically accurate industries that existed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries and collapsed during the Depression. Burns didn't invest in them, ironically. He invested in them when they were viable businesses, which means he was making financial decisions at a time when Zeppelins were cutting-edge technology and Spats were standard footwear. That places his active business career in the 1910s or 1920s at the absolute latest. For him to have been old enough to manage a significant investment portfolio in that era, he would need to have been born no later than the 1880s. That makes him at minimum over 140 years old. But the show's biographical clues push his birth date even further back. Burns has referenced attending Yale, which tracks with his upper-class New England background. He's described his family as old-money industrialists, with ties to the founding of Springfield itself. He's mentioned personal experiences from the Civil War era that don't read as family stories passed down from grandparents. They read as first-hand accounts. He tells these stories with the casual specificity of someone describing what they had for lunch, not with the reverence of someone recounting ancestral folklore. When Burns talks about the past, he's not remembering what his grandfather told him. He's remembering what he saw. His physical condition supports the immortality theory in disturbing ways. Burns is canonically the weakest, frailest, most medically compromised character in the show. He can be knocked over by a slight breeze. He's had every disease known to medicine and several that aren't. His physical examination in one episode reveals that he has so many simultaneous illnesses that they've reached a kind of equilibrium, each disease blocking the others from killing him. The doctor compares it to the Three Stooges trying to get through a door at the same time. None of them can get through because they're all stuck together. Burns' diseases aren't killing him because they're canceling each other out. His body has reached a state of pathological stasis where decline is impossible because there's nothing left to decline. He's not alive in the way that healthy people are alive. He's alive in the way that a pickled specimen in a museum jar is alive, preserved, suspended, unchanging. And yet, despite this extreme physical fragility, Burns has survived things that would kill virtually anyone else. In the famous Who Shot Mr. Burns two-parter, which aired as the Season 6 finale and Season 7 premiere in 1995, Burns constructs a giant mechanical sunblocker to deprive Springfield of natural sunlight, forcing the entire town to depend on his nuclear power plant for energy. This plan is so villainous, so cartoonishly evil that someone shoots him. And the shooter is Maggie Simpson, a baby, a literal infant, accidentally discharges a firearm and puts a bullet into Burns' chest. And Burns survives. He's hospitalized. He recovers. He goes back to running the power plant like nothing happened. A man who can be knocked unconscious by a newspaper landing on his head takes a gunshot wound to the torso and walks it off. That's not frailty. That's something else. That's a body that has forgotten how to die. The vampirism connection isn't subtle. In Treehouse of Horror 4, which aired in Season 5, one of the 3 segments is a direct parody of Bram Stoker's Dracula. In that segment, Burns is literally a vampire. He has fangs. He drinks blood. He turns the residents of Springfield into the undead. The segment ends with the family discovering that Marge was the head vampire all along, which plays as a twist ending. But the initial premise, Burns as an immortal blood-drinking creature of the night, is presented with remarkable fidelity to vampire mythology. And while Treehouse of Horror episodes are technically non-canonical, the show has a long history of using its Halloween specials to tell truths that the regular episodes can't. Non-canon doesn't mean non-truthful. It means the writers have plausible deniability. Burns' involvement with the Stonecutters adds another layer. In Homer the Great, Season 6, Episode 12, Homer discovers that many of Springfield's most prominent citizens are members of a secret society called the Stonecutters. The Stonecutters, per their own anthem, are responsible for keeping the metric system down, making Steve Guttenberg a star, keeping Atlantis off the maps, and controlling the British crown. Burns is a member, not a low-ranking one, a senior figure in an organization that the show presents as genuinely controlling global affairs from behind the scenes. And the Stonecutters have been around for centuries. Their rituals reference medieval traditions. Their hierarchy predates the United States. If Burns is a senior member of an organization this old, his membership can't be recent. He's been part of this group for a long time, possibly a very long time. Possibly since before the group started calling itself the Stonecutters. The power plant is the key to understanding how Burns maintains his impossible lifespan. The Springfield nuclear power plant is the most dangerous, most poorly maintained, most flagrantly unsafe nuclear facility in fiction. It has 342 documented safety violations that would cost over $56 million to fix. It leaks radioactive waste into the local waterway, creating mutant fish with 3 eyes. Its employees include a man with severe brain damage who was hired specifically because his incompetence ensures he'll never report the problems. The plant's cooling towers emit visible radiation. Its containment protocols are non-existent. Its emergency procedures consist of Homer pressing random buttons and hoping for the best. By any rational standard, this facility should have been shut down decades ago, but it hasn't been, and Burns fights harder to keep the plant running than he fights for anything else in his life. When safety inspectors find the violations, Burns runs for governor to eliminate the regulations. When the town threatens to close the plant, Burns blocks out the sun to make them dependent on his energy. When environmental groups protest the waste, Burns finds ways to silence them. The man will do literally anything to keep this plant operational. And the theory suggests that his desperation isn't about money or power or ego. It's about survival. The plant's radiation is what keeps Burns alive. He's not running a power company. He's running a life support system. The low-level radiation exposure that's slowly giving everyone else in Springfield cancer is the same radiation that's sustaining Burns's decayed but functional biology. He needs the plant the way a dialysis patient needs the machine. Shut it down, and Burns doesn't lose a business. He loses the only thing keeping his 140-year-old body from finally completing the dying process it started a century ago. This would explain why Burns is so obsessed with youth and health despite clearly having access to medical care that money should be able to provide. He's tried everything. He's had every treatment. Nothing works because the problem isn't a disease. The problem is time. He's running out of the radiation that sustains him. And every safety improvement, every waste reduction, every environmental protection that gets implemented at the plant reduces the dosage that keeps him alive. When Burns fights environmental regulations, he's not protecting his profit margins. He's fighting for his life. Every regulation that limits the plant's radioactive output is a regulation that shortens his remaining time on Earth. The implications extend to his relationship with Homer. Burns has been shown to not remember Homer's name despite Homer being one of his longest tenured employees. He's called Homer, that fat man from Sector 7G, and dozens of other dismissive descriptions. A popular fan theory suggests that Burns actually remembers Homer perfectly and pretends not to, as a psychological dominance tactic. There's an episode in Season 2 where Burns tells Homer, "Simpson, I shall make it the focus of my remaining years that your dreams will go unfulfilled," which is a remarkably specific threat that requires Burns to both know and remember exactly who Homer is. But through the lens of the immortality theory, the name forgetting takes on a different meaning. Burns has been alive for over a century. He's known thousands of employees. Tens of thousands of people have passed through his life, and most of them are dead. Of course he can't remember Homer's name. He can't remember anyone's name, not because he's cruel, though he is, but because when you've been alive for 140 years, individual humans start to blur together. They come and they go and they die, and new ones replace them, and their faces merge and their names dissolve. And after a while, the only thing that distinguishes one employee from another is the sector they work in and the approximate shape of their body. Burns doesn't remember Homer because Homer is, to a man who has watched generations of Springfielders live and die, functionally indistinguishable from the last 200 Sector 7G employees who held the same job and made the same mistakes and died the same preventable deaths. The scariest part of the Burns immortality theory isn't that he can't die. It's that he's been alive long enough to know that nothing matters. Not money, not power, not revenge. He's had all of those things for longer than most families have existed. What drives Burns now isn't ambition, it's routine. He goes to work because that's what he's always done. He schemes because scheming is the only activity that still engages a brain that ran out of new experiences sometime around the McKinley administration. He's not evil, he's bored. And boredom, spread across a century and a half of uninterrupted consciousness, looks exactly like the kind of casual, disconnected cruelty that Burns displays in every episode. He doesn't hate Homer, he doesn't even see Homer. Homer is a blip, a temporary arrangement of atoms that will soon rearrange itself into something equally forgettable. And Burns will still be here. He'll always be here, standing in his office, looking down at Springfield through a window that he's looked through since before anyone currently alive was born, waiting for the next Homer to arrive and the current one to leave, and the one after that, and the one after that, forever, because Charles Montgomery Burns is not a man, he's a monument, and monuments don't die. They just get older and colder and harder to read. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Simpson gene and the theory that every single member of the Simpson family is a suppressed genius who chose stupidity because intelligence made them miserable. This one sounds ridiculous on its face. Homer Simpson, the man who once got his arm stuck in 2 different vending machines simultaneously, is secretly a genius? The man who set himself on fire trying to check if the stove was hot is hiding intellectual gifts? The man whose IQ was measured at approximately 55 before a crayon was removed from his brain, who was literally classified as below the threshold for mental disability, is actually brilliant? Yes. According to the show's own canonical evidence, the answer is yes. And not just Homer, every Simpson, all of them, Bart, Marge, Maggie, and Grandpa Abe. The only Simpson who didn't suppress her intelligence is Lisa, and the show makes it painfully clear that she's the most miserable one in the family because of that choice. The foundational evidence comes from Season 12, Episode 9, an episode called Chomer. In that episode, Homer visits the hospital and undergoes a brain scan that reveals something unexpected. There is a crayon lodged deep in his brain. It's been there since childhood. Homer, as a young boy, shoved a crayon up his nose and it traveled into his frontal lobe, where it has been pressing against his brain tissue for decades, impairing his cognitive function. The doctors remove the crayon, and the moment it comes out, Homer's IQ skyrockets. He becomes articulate, thoughtful, emotionally sophisticated. He reads voraciously. He writes a safety report for the nuclear power plant that identifies every flaw in the facility's operations. He connects with Lisa on an intellectual level for the first time in her life. He becomes the man he was always capable of being. And then he asks them to put the crayon back in, because genius Homer is miserable. He can see how stupid everyone around him is. He can see how pointless his job is. He can see the flaws in his marriage, the lies that sustain his friendships, the systemic dysfunction that makes Springfield function. He can see everything, and seeing everything makes him unable to enjoy anything. His friends at Moe's Tavern don't want to talk to him anymore because he uses words they don't understand. Marge is intimidated by his sudden competence. Bart sees him as a stranger. The only person who benefits from Homer's intelligence is Lisa, and even she is eventually unnerved by how quickly her father surpassed her. Genius Homer is objectively a better person, a better father, a better employee, a better citizen. But he's also objectively unhappy. So he walks back into the hospital, sits in the chair, and tells the doctor to put the crayon back in his brain. He chooses ignorance. He chooses happiness. And the show presents this not as a tragedy, but as a rational decision. Homer tried being smart. Being smart sucked. So he went back to being Homer. This episode alone would be enough to build a theory on, but the show doesn't stop there. It extends the pattern to every other member of the Simpson family, creating a consistent thesis across decades of episodes. The Simpsons aren't stupid, they're choosing not to be smart. And the evidence for each family member is surprisingly robust. Start with Grandpa Abe. Abraham Simpson is presented as a senile, rambling, largely incoherent old man who falls asleep mid-sentence, tells stories that go nowhere, and can't remember basic facts about his own life. He lives in the Springfield retirement castle, largely forgotten by his family. and his primary contribution to most episodes is comic relief derived from his apparent mental decline. But the show has also established that Abe Simpson was a World War II veteran who served with distinction. He flew planes. He participated in complex military operations. He was a spy, or at least adjacent to espionage, in multiple episodes. He's been shown as an accomplished pianist. He's demonstrated sophisticated tactical thinking when the situation demands it. In one episode, he wrestled an opponent into submission using technique that requires significant training and physical coordination. The man who can't remember his own address in the present day was a decorated soldier who performed at a level that requires intelligence, courage, and adaptability just a few decades earlier. His senility isn't natural decline, it's the same pattern Homer follows. Abe was smart, and being smart brought him nothing but war, loss, disappointment, and the knowledge that the country he fought for didn't care about him once the fighting stopped. So he let go. He let his mind soften. He let the memories blur. And now he's a happy old man in a retirement home, telling rambling stories that go nowhere, which is exactly where he wants to be. Now consider Marge. Marge Simpson is consistently portrayed as a dutiful housewife whose intellectual contributions to the family are limited to practical domestic management. She cooks, she cleans, she mediates disputes between Homer and the children. She's the emotional anchor of the household, but rarely the intellectual one. However, the show has established that Marge was an excellent student in high school. She was ambitious, driven, and academically capable. She had opportunities that she deliberately chose not to pursue. In multiple flashback episodes, we see a young Marge who is sharp, articulate, and curious. She chose the housewife path, not because she lacked options, but because she had already observed what ambition did to the people around her. She watched her mother struggle. She watched her sisters Patty and Selma become bitter, cynical women whose intelligence gave them nothing but contempt for everyone else. Marge saw what happened to smart women in her world and decided she'd rather be happy. She married Homer, she stayed home, she raised her kids. And she never once showed the slightest regret about those choices because for Marge, the choice was obvious. Intelligence is a prison that looks like a library. She'd rather live in a warm, messy house with a stupid husband she loves than in a clean apartment full of books she reads alone. Bart is the most interesting case because the show has given us direct evidence that his academic failure is a performance. In the second episode of the series, Bart the Genius in Season 1, Bart cheats on an IQ test and is mistakenly placed in a school for gifted children. The episode plays this as a straightforward comedy of errors, with Bart struggling in the advanced classes because he doesn't belong there. But here's what the episode actually reveals. Bart is able to maintain the illusion of being gifted for an extended period. He interacts with genuinely brilliant children and holds his own socially. He understands enough about the advanced material to fake his way through conversations about it. A truly stupid child couldn't do that. A truly stupid child would be exposed immediately. Bart's survival in the gifted program demonstrates a level of social intelligence and adaptive thinking that goes far beyond what his grades suggest. Later episodes deepen this pattern. In The Crepes of Wrath, Season 1, Episode 11, Bart is sent to France through a foreign exchange program. He's enslaved by two criminal winemakers who force him to work in their vineyard. After 2 months of immersion with no formal instruction, Bart spontaneously begins speaking fluent French. Not tourist French, not survival phrases, fluent, grammatically correct, conversationally nuanced French. He uses it to report his abusers to a French police officer who takes immediate action based on Bart's detailed account. This is a 10-year-old who was failing English class in Springfield, and he mastered a second language through pure environmental exposure in 8 weeks. That doesn't happen to stupid kids. That happens to kids with exceptional linguistic aptitude who aren't interested in using it in a classroom. Bart's pranks are the most overlooked evidence of his intelligence. His schemes require planning, timing, knowledge of human psychology, understanding of cause and effect, and the ability to anticipate how authority figures will respond to specific stimuli. He's not pulling random stunts, he's engineering social situations with the precision of a behavioral scientist. When Bart Prank calls Moe's Tavern, he's demonstrating real-time improvisation, verbal dexterity, and an understanding of how language can be used to manipulate someone's behavior. When he organizes larger-scale pranks at school, he's demonstrating project management, delegation, and risk assessment. These are executive function skills that require significant cognitive resources. Bart isn't failing school because he can't do the work. He's failing school because he's decided the work isn't worth doing. He watched his father get smart and become miserable. He watched his sister become the smartest person in the family and also become the saddest. And he made the same choice every other Simpson has made. He chose happiness. He chose pranks over homework, adventure over study, experience over achievement. And his grades reflect not his ability, but his priorities. Maggie is the wild card. She's a baby, so the show has limited ability to demonstrate her cognitive capacity through dialogue or academic performance. But the things Maggie does speak louder than words ever could. She shot Mr. Burns. This is not a joke or speculation. It's the canonical resolution of the show's most famous mystery. In Who Shot Mr. Burns, the entire town is investigated. Every citizen of Springfield is a suspect. The contest to guess the shooter was promoted nationally, and not a single person who entered the official contest guessed correctly. The DVD commentary for the episodes confirms that one person did post the correct answer on a Simpsons newsgroup the night the first part aired, but the producers couldn't track them down afterward because their college email account was deactivated over the summer. The shooter was Maggie. A 1-year-old baby identified a threat, located a weapon, and neutralized the target. This is not accidental. The show has gone out of its way across multiple episodes to demonstrate that Maggie possesses cognitive abilities that shouldn't be possible for a child her age. She's saved Homer's life on multiple occasions. She's demonstrated problem-solving ability that rivals adult characters. She operates with a quiet, watchful efficiency that suggests she understands far more about the world than anyone gives her credit for. Elizabeth Taylor voiced Maggie's first word. That's a fact. In Lisa's First Word, Season 4, Episode 10. Maggie says "Daddy" for the first time, and the voice is provided by Elizabeth Taylor. But the show made a deliberate choice with that moment. Maggie waits. She waits until she's alone, until nobody is listening, until the performance of being a silent baby won't be disrupted. And then she speaks, not to Homer directly, to herself, as if she's been capable of speech the entire time and has simply chosen not to demonstrate that capability. Maggie doesn't talk because talking would reveal how much she understands. And understanding, as every other Simpson has learned, leads to unhappiness. Maggie watches Lisa suffer under the weight of her own brilliance and learns the lesson before she can even articulate it. Silence is safety, ignorance is a choice, and the pacifier isn't a comfort object. It's a muzzle she puts on herself. Lisa is the control group. She's the Simpson who chose intelligence over happiness, and the show punishes her for it constantly. She's the smartest person in her family, probably the smartest person in Springfield, and she's also the most lonely, most frustrated, most consistently disappointed character in the series. She has no friends her own age. Her saxophone is her primary emotional outlet. She's a vegetarian in a family of meat eaters. She's a Buddhist in a town of casual Christians. She's a liberal in a conservative community. Every choice she's made that stems from her intelligence has isolated her further from the people she loves. Homer can't relate to her. Bart resents her. Marge doesn't understand her. Maggie hasn't spoken to her. Lisa Simpson is living proof that the Simpson gene theory is correct, not because she's smart, but because being smart has made her miserable in exactly the ways that Homer, Bart, Marge, Grandpa, and Maggie all instinctively avoided. They looked at the choice between intelligence and happiness and chose happiness. Lisa looked at the same choice and chose intelligence. And every episode of The Simpsons is, in some way, a demonstration of why her choice was wrong. The Simpson gene itself is introduced in the show as a genetic trait on the Y chromosome that supposedly makes male Simpsons stupid. Grandpa Abe explains it to Lisa as a family curse that affects the men but not the women. But the crayon episode disproves this completely. Homer's stupidity isn't genetic. It's caused by a foreign object lodged in his brain. Remove the crayon and his intelligence returns immediately. The Simpson gene isn't a gene at all. It's an excuse. It's a story the family tells itself to explain why the men choose ignorance, because admitting that stupidity is a choice would mean admitting that happiness requires giving something up. And the Simpsons, all of them, have decided that what they're giving up, the loneliness of intelligence, the isolation of awareness, the crushing weight of understanding exactly how broken the world is, isn't worth keeping. The Simpsons aren't a stupid family. They're a family of geniuses who made the same calculated decision across multiple generations. Be dumb, be happy. Let Lisa carry the burden of knowing and love her from a distance, and hope she figures out what the rest of them already know. That the meaning of life isn't understanding. It's not understanding, and being okay with that. Homer asked God the meaning of life. God said he'd find out when he died. Maybe the meaning of life is that it's better not to know. And the Simpsons, all of them except Lisa, figured that out without having to die first. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the prediction machine and the theory that The Simpsons has been forecasting real-world events for over 3 decades, and whether it's coincidence, calculation, or something nobody wants to name. Let's be clear about what we're talking about here, because the internet has turned this into a meme and the meme has eaten the evidence. The Simpsons has made what appear to be accurate predictions about future events on dozens of occasions. Some of these are verified, documented, and indisputable. Others are fabricated, edited, or misattributed by people chasing clicks. And somewhere in the gap between the real predictions and the fake ones lies a question that even the show's own creators seem uncomfortable answering. How does a cartoon about a yellow family in a fictional American town keep getting the future right? Let's start with the ones that are actually real, because separating fact from internet mythology is the first step toward understanding what's actually happening here. The most famous prediction is Donald Trump's presidency. In Bart to the Future, Season 11, Episode 17, which aired on March 19, 2000, the show depicts a future where Lisa Simpson has become the first heterosexual female president of the United States. During a cabinet meeting, Lisa says, "As you know, we've inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump." That line aired 16 years before Donald Trump won the 2016 presidential election. It's real, it's not edited, it's not taken out of context. In the year 2000, The Simpsons told millions of viewers that Donald Trump would be president, and in 2016, he was. Al Jean, the show's longest-serving showrunner, explained the line's origin in an interview with MIT Technology Review published in October of 2025. He said the original pitch for the joke used Johnny Depp instead of Trump, but the writers changed it because Trump was funnier. Gene also noted that in 2015, the show made a short video called Trump-tastic Voyage that predicted Trump would run in 2016, 2020, 2024, and 2028. As of early 2026, they're 3 for 4 on that prediction. Next is the Disney-Fox merger. In When You Dish Upon a Star, Season 10, Episode 5, which aired in 1998, there's a brief visual gag showing a sign that reads, 20th Century Fox, a division of Walt Disney Company. 21 years later, in March of 2019, the Walt Disney Company completed its acquisition of 21st Century Fox's entertainment assets for approximately $71 billion. The Simpsons called it 2 decades in advance. The sign is on screen for about 2 seconds. Nobody noticed it when the episode aired. It became famous retroactively after the merger was announced, when fans combed through old episodes looking for things the show had gotten right. The U.S. Olympic curling gold medal is one of the eerier ones. In Boy Meets Curl, Season 21, Episode 12, which aired on February 14, 2010, Homer and Marge join the U.S. Olympic curling team and win a gold medal by defeating Sweden. 8 years later, at the 2018 Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang, South Korea, the United States men's curling team won their first ever Olympic gold medal by defeating Sweden in the final. Same sport, same opponent, same result, different decade. That's not a general prediction like technology will advance or a politician will be corrupt. That's a specific sporting outcome involving a specific country playing against a specific opponent, and The Simpsons got it right 8 years before it happened. The Cypress Hill London Symphony Orchestra collaboration is the most recent verified prediction. In Homerpalooza, which aired in 1996, the show features a joke in which Cypress Hill, the hip-hop group, accidentally books the London Symphony Orchestra while under the influence. In 2024, nearly 30 years later, Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at Royal Albert Hall in London. The band themselves acknowledged the connection, calling it a dream come true that started as a Simpsons joke. The FIFA corruption scandal is another strong one. And You Don't Have to Live Like a Referee, Season 25. Episode 16, which aired on March 30th, 2014, the show depicts a FIFA official being arrested for corruption. 14 months later, on May 27, 2015, several FIFA executives were arrested on federal corruption charges in an investigation that led to widespread reforms within the organization. The episode aired before the arrests, before the indictments, before any public indication that a major corruption investigation was underway at FIFA. The Simpsons didn't predict that FIFA was corrupt. Everyone knew FIFA was corrupt. What they predicted was the specific timing and manner of the reckoning. The autocorrect joke predates both the iPhone and the modern smartphone. In Lisa on Ice, Season 6, Episode 8, which aired on November 13, 1994, a character uses an Apple Newton personal digital assistant. The Newton's handwriting recognition converts "beat up Martin" into "eat up Martha." This is now cited as a prediction of autocorrect technology, which didn't become a universal consumer experience until the iPhone launched in 2007. However, Snopes and other fact-checking organizations have pointed out that the Apple Newton was a real product that existed in 1993, and it was notorious for its poor handwriting recognition. The Simpsons wasn't predicting autocorrect. They were making a joke about a product that already existed. The joke just happened to become more relevant as the technology it was mocking evolved into something everyone uses daily. And the smartwatch, in Lisa's Wedding, Season 6, Episode 19, which aired on March 19, 1995, a character uses a wrist-mounted communication device that looks remarkably like a modern smartwatch. The Apple Watch was introduced in September of 2014, nearly 20 years later. But again, the idea of a wrist communicator wasn't original to The Simpsons. Dick Tracy wore one in the 1930s. Star Trek featured communicator badges. The concept of a watch that does more than tell time has been a staple of science fiction for almost a century. The Simpsons didn't invent the idea. They just happened to depict it in a way that closely resembled what eventually became a real product. Now here's where the debunking gets important, because a significant portion of what the internet attributes to The Simpsons is completely fabricated. Al Jean addressed this directly in his MIT Technology Review interview. He said, and I'm paraphrasing to stay within fair use, that after major events happen, people create fake Simpsons frames and circulate them online. He specifically mentioned that people faked screenshots appearing to predict the 2024 Baltimore Bridge collapse and the 2019 Notre Dame fire. He also noted that real images from the Osaka flu episode, which aired in 1993, were digitally altered to include the word coronavirus after the COVID-19 pandemic began. These edits were convincing enough to fool major news outlets and generate millions of views on social media before being debunked. The Osaka flu episode itself is an interesting case study in how prediction mythology works. In Margin Chains, Season 4, Episode 21, which aired in 1993, Springfield is hit by a flu pandemic that originates in Japan. Workers at a factory in Osaka cough on products that are shipped to Springfield, and the flu spreads through the town. The episode features quarantines, panic buying, and civic chaos. When COVID-19 emerged from Wuhan, China in late 2019, people immediately pointed to this episode as a prediction. But the Osaka flu is a flu, not a coronavirus. It comes from Japan, not China. The mechanism of transmission, coughing on manufactured goods, doesn't match how COVID-19 actually spread. The episode predicted that a pandemic would happen, but pandemics have happened roughly once a decade throughout human history. Predicting that a pandemic would eventually occur is like predicting that it will rain eventually. You're going to be right. So what's actually happening? How do we explain the real predictions, the ones that can't be dismissed as coincidence or fabrication? Al Jean's own explanation is the most honest one any showrunner has given. He told MIT Technology Review that it's cherry picking. There are 35 years of material, 800 plus episodes. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, observations, and visual gags. Multiply 800 episodes by 50 jokes per episode, and you're looking at 40,000 individual comedic premises. If even 0.1% of those premises correspond to real future events, that's still 40 apparent predictions. The show isn't prophetic, it's prolific. It has generated so much material over such a long period that some of it was going to align with reality through pure statistical probability. Producer Bill Oakley has been even more blunt. He said, and I'm paraphrasing again, that there are very few cases where The Simpsons actually predicted something. It's mainly coincidence because the episodes are so old that history repeats itself. Oakley's point is crucial. The Simpsons doesn't predict the future, it satirizes the present, and the present has a tendency to repeat. If you make a joke about a corrupt politician in 1998, a corrupt politician will eventually do the thing you joked about, because corrupt politicians always eventually do those things. If you make a joke about technology getting smarter in 1995, technology will get smarter because that's what technology does. If you make a joke about a specific country winning a specific sporting event, and that sport has limited participants, and your joke picks a plausible winner, eventually probability will hand you a correct prediction. But here's the thing that the rational explanation can't fully account for. The Simpsons writing staff is not a random joke generator. They're some of the most highly educated comedy writers in television history. The show's writing room has, at various points, been staffed by graduates of Harvard, Yale, and other Ivy League universities. Many of the writers came from the Harvard Lampoon, one of the most prestigious humor publications in the country, which has a long tradition of producing not just comedians, but mathematicians, economists, and scientists. These are people who understand statistical modeling, political science, economic theory, and social psychology. They don't just make random jokes, they make informed jokes. When they joked about Trump becoming president in 2000, they weren't pulling a name out of a hat. Trump had already run a brief presidential campaign in 1999 with the Reform Party. He was a known political entity with known ambitions. The Simpsons writers, drawing on their knowledge of political trends and American culture, extrapolated a plausible future from an observable present. They didn't see the future. They understood the present well enough to make an educated guess about where it was heading. When they joked about Disney buying Fox, they were commenting on a trend of media consolidation that was already visible in the late 1990s. Disney had been acquiring entertainment properties for years. Fox was a major independent studio. The eventual merger wasn't psychic foresight. It was industry analysis rendered as a sight gag. When they joked about Cypress Hill performing with a symphony orchestra, they were making a joke about a group known for drug use doing something absurd while intoxicated. The fact that the band eventually decided to actually do it isn't the show predicting the future, it's the show creating the future. Cypress Hill saw the joke, thought it was funny, and made it real. The Simpsons didn't predict the concert, they inspired it. This is the part that gets genuinely unsettling. Not the predictions themselves, but what they reveal about the relationship between fiction and reality. The Simpsons has been on the air for so long, has been watched by so many people, and has generated so much cultural material that it has become a kind of mirror that reality looks into for ideas. Politicians watch the show and see satire of their own behavior, then unconsciously reproduce the satirized behavior because it's been normalized by appearing on television. Corporations see jokes about mergers and acquisitions and think, well, that's not a bad idea. Athletes see predictions of sporting victories and carry them as psychological motivation. The Simpsons isn't predicting the future is reading The Simpsons' homework and turning it in as its own. The show has aired over 800 episodes across 37 seasons. It has been renewed through season 40. By the time this current renewal cycle ends, the show will have produced close to 900 episodes over nearly 4 decades. That's 900 half hours of satirical commentary on every aspect of American life, politics, technology, culture, sports, entertainment, religion, education, and human behavior. If you generate that much material about every conceivable topic, you will, by pure mathematical certainty, appear to have predicted things you merely observed in their early stages. The writers aren't psychics. They're not time travelers. They're not part of a secret government program with access to classified future intelligence. They're extremely well-educated people who spend their entire professional lives thinking about how American society works, what its tendencies are, and where those tendencies lead when taken to logical extremes. They make jokes about the endpoints of trends, and sometimes the trends reach those endpoints, not because the Simpsons willed them into existence, but because the trends were always heading there, and the writers were perceptive enough to see it before everyone else. Algene put it best, and I'll end this segment with his words from that MIT Technology Review interview. He said maybe they're from the future, and then he told the interviewer to decide for themselves. He's not claiming to be a prophet. He's not denying the pattern. He's doing what the show has always done, presenting the evidence, wrapping it in humor, and leaving you to draw your own conclusions. And that, more than any individual prediction, is why people can't stop looking for the next one. Because the scariest possibility isn't that The Simpsons can see the future. It's that the future is so predictable that a cartoon figured it out before we did. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Moe Scislack and the theory that he has known since the very first prank call that Bart Simpson is the voice on the other end of the phone. And the reason he keeps answering, the reason he keeps falling for it, the reason he keeps shouting threats at a child he could identify in seconds if he actually tried, is because those calls are the only proof Moe has that someone in this world thinks about him enough to pick up the phone. This one hurts. I'm going to be honest with you, this one is not a fun conspiracy theory. This one is a character study wrapped in a tragedy disguised as a running gag, and once you see it, every future prank call scene becomes almost impossible to laugh at. Let's establish the basics. Bart Simpson has been prank calling Moe's Tavern since the very first season of The Simpsons. The format is always the same. Bart calls the bar. He asks Moe to page a fictional customer using a name that, when spoken aloud, sounds like an embarrassing phrase. Moe takes the bait. He shouts the name across the bar. The patrons laugh. Moe realizes he's been pranked. He screams threats into the phone. Bart hangs up. It's one of the show's oldest and most beloved recurring gags. It's inspired countless imitations. It's been parodied, referenced, and homaged by dozens of other shows. And it makes absolutely no sense if you think about it for more than 3 seconds. Moe knows Homer Simpson. Moe has been Homer's bartender and close friend for the entire run of the series. Homer sits at Moe's bar nearly every day. Moe has been to the Simpson house. He's eaten dinner with the family. He's watched the kids grow up. He's heard Bart's voice hundreds if not thousands of times across 37 seasons of close personal friendship with the boy's father. The idea that Moe cannot recognize the voice of his best friend's 10-year-old son is absurd on its face. It's a suspension of disbelief that works in a sitcom context because the joke is funny, but it doesn't work in any universe where Moe possesses even baseline human hearing. And Moe doesn't just hear Bart's voice during prank calls. He hears it at the Simpson house. He hears it at community events. He hears it when Homer brings his family into the bar. Moe has directly interacted with Bart on numerous occasions. He knows what Bart sounds like in person. The voice Bart uses during prank calls is not disguised. It's not altered. It's not lowered or modulated. It's Bart's regular voice, a 10-year-old's regular speaking voice. And Moe, a grown man who has spent decades in the service industry and has presumably dealt with thousands of customers, prank callers, wrong numbers, and phone solicitors, cannot figure out that the repeated calls asking for fictional people with embarrassing names are coming from the kid who lives 4 houses down from his bar. Unless he can, and he's choosing not to. Because if Moe identifies Bart as the prank caller, the calls stop. And if the calls stop, Moe loses something he can't replace. Those prank calls are engagement. They're interaction. There's someone on the other end of a phone line who chose to call Moe's Tavern specifically, deliberately, with premeditation and planning. Not because they needed to reach someone else, not because they dialed the wrong number, but because Moe's was the target. Moe was the audience. Moe was the person they wanted to speak to, even if the reason was to humiliate him. The show has been remarkably consistent in depicting Moe as one of the loneliest, most isolated characters in Springfield. His romantic life is non-existent or catastrophic. His friendships are limited to the regulars at his bar, and those friendships are transactional. People come to Moe's to drink. They stay because it's cheap and close. Nobody comes to see Moe specifically. Nobody calls Moe to check in on him. Nobody invites Moe to things unless the event is happening at or near his bar. In multiple episodes, the show has depicted Moe attempting suicide, with varying degrees of seriousness. He's shown hanging from a noose that breaks. He's shown on ledges. He's shown in moments of such profound despair that the comedy barely registers. Moe Scislack is a man who has constructed an entire life around a business that exists so other people can forget their problems, and in doing so, he's made himself invisible. He's the furniture. He's the background. He's the guy who pours the drinks and wipes the counter and listens to everyone else's stories and never tells his own because nobody asks. And then the phone rings. And it's Bart, and Bart asks for Amanda hug and kiss. And Mo shouts the name across the bar, and everyone laughs, and Bart giggles on the other end. And for 30 seconds, Mo is the center of attention. Not positive attention, not flattering attention, but attention. Someone targeted him. Someone thought about him specifically, crafted a joke at his expense, dialed his number, and waited to hear his voice. In a life defined by invisibility, that's something. In a life where the only people who come through your door are trying to escape their own lives, a phone call that exists solely because of you, even a humiliating one, is proof that you exist. Mo's reaction to the calls supports this theory more than it undermines it. When he realizes he's been pranked, he screams. He threatens violence. He swears revenge. But he never follows through. He never installs caller ID, which has been commercially available since the 1990s. He never asks Homer if Bart has been making prank calls. He never contacts the phone company. He never changes his number. He never puts up a sign in the bar warning about prank callers. He does absolutely nothing to prevent the calls from happening again. And they always happen again, because Mo doesn't want them to stop. There's a brief moment in several prank call scenes that most viewers miss. After Mo shouts the embarrassing name and realizes the joke, there's a microsecond, barely perceptible, where his anger hasn't quite reached his face yet, where he's still processing, where something that looks almost like recognition flickers across his expression before the performance of outrage takes over. It's a beat, an acting choice, a tiny gap between comprehension and reaction that suggests the anger isn't spontaneous, it's rehearsed. Mo knows what's coming, he knows who's calling. And he plays his role in the bit because the bit is the relationship, and the relationship, toxic and one-sided and built entirely on a child's entertainment at his expense, is the closest thing to consistent human contact that Mo Syslak has. Think about it from Bart's perspective too. Bart doesn't prank call random businesses, he calls Mo's, specifically every time. He doesn't call the Quick E-Mart. He doesn't call Springfield Elementary. He doesn't call the police station or the fire department or any of the dozens of other businesses in Springfield that would react just as dramatically to a prank call. He calls Mo's Tavern because Mo is the target. And why is Mo the target? Because Mo reacts. Mo gives a Bart exactly what he wants, which is the satisfaction of having caused an effect in the world. A 10-year-old boy who feels powerless in his own life, whose father ignores him, whose school dismisses him, whose intelligence is unrecognized and his potential is wasted, picks up the phone and dials a number and makes a grown man shout something ridiculous in front of a room full of people. For Bart, it's power. For Mo, it's connection. They need each other. They've always needed each other, and neither of them will ever admit it. The most telling detail is that when the show has depicted situations where Bart can't or won't make the calls, Mo seems worse off. His depression deepens. His isolation becomes more pronounced. The calls aren't just a recurring gag, they're a support structure. A bizarre, dysfunctional, codependent support structure that keeps a suicidal bartender tethered to the world by reminding him once every few episodes that someone out there knows his phone number and cares enough to dial it. Bart Simpson might be calling to humiliate Mo, but he's also calling to keep Mo alive. And Mo, somewhere deep in the part of his brain that processes loneliness and attachment, knows this. He knows Bart is the caller, he's always known. And he will never admit it because admitting it would end the calls, and ending the calls would end the one thread of human connection that Mo Syslak has left. He'd rather be the butt of a 10-year-old's joke than be forgotten entirely. And honestly, can you blame him? The phone rings at Mo's Tavern. Mo picks up. He already knows who it is. He already knows what's going to happen. He'll shout a fake name. Everyone will laugh. He'll pretend to be angry. He'll threaten the caller. He'll hang up. And tomorrow, or next week, or next episode, it'll happen again. And Mo will answer. He'll always answer. Because the worst thing that could happen to Mo Syslak isn't being pranked by a 10-year-old. It's the phone not ringing at all. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Hans Moleman and the theory that he is not one person, but an entire species. Hans Moleman has died more times on screen than any other character in the history of The Simpsons. He's been run over, he's been buried alive, He's been drilled through the skull, he's been eaten by alligators, he's been crushed, burned, impaled, electrocuted, and subjected to every conceivable form of cartoon violence that the writers could imagine across 37 seasons. And yet he keeps showing up, episode after episode, season after season, same hunched posture, same round glasses, same quavering voice, same apparent age of approximately 80 years old, despite his driver's license canonically listing his age as 31. That last detail is the one that breaks everything. Hans Moleman is 31 years old. The show has confirmed this. His driver's license, shown on screen, lists his date of birth in a way that makes him a man in his early 30s. He looks 80, he moves like he's 90, he speaks like he's been alive since the invention of speech. But according to the one official document the show has produced for this character, he's younger than Homer Simpson. That's not aging, that's not disease, that's not the result of hard living or poor nutrition or exposure to Springfield's notoriously contaminated water supply. That's a different species wearing a human disguise that isn't calibrated correctly. The theory goes like this. Hans Moleman isn't a person. He's a designation, an operating name shared by a colony of subterranean humanoid creatures who live beneath Springfield and periodically send scouts to the surface. Each moleman who appears in an episode is a different individual from the colony. When one dies, the colony sends another. Same clothes, same glasses, same general appearance, but a different biological entity, which is why no single death is permanent, and why the character can appear in the very next episode with no injuries, no memory of the previous death, and no acknowledgement that anything happened. The name itself is a clue that the show put in plain sight. Moleman, mole, man. A man who is a mole. Or more accurately, a mole-shaped creature that is pretending to be a man. The character's entire design reinforces this. His skin is wrinkled and loose, like an underground dwelling creature unaccustomed to sunlight. His eyes are tiny and squinting behind thick glasses, consistent with the species adapted to darkness. His posture is hunched, as if his body is designed for tunnels rather than upright walking. His movements are slow and deliberate, like a creature navigating an unfamiliar environment. Every physical characteristic of Hans Moleman is consistent with a being that evolved underground and is uncomfortable on the surface. Let's count some of the documented deaths, because the sheer volume is what transforms this from a running gag into an existential mystery. In the episode where Springfield holds a film festival, Moleman enters a short film called Man Getting Hit by Football. It's exactly what the title describes. A football hits Moleman in the groin. He doubles over, he falls. The audience laughs. It's a joke about lowbrow entertainment. But in other episodes, Moleman's deaths are far more permanent. He's been shown inside a coffin at a funeral. He's been declared dead by medical professionals. He's been shown in situations where survival is physically impossible and the show doesn't cut away or suggest rescue. Moleman dies, full stop. And then he's back. The traditional explanation for this is that it's a cartoon. Characters in animated sitcoms don't have permanent continuity in the same way live-action characters do. Kenny dies every episode in South Park. Characters in Looney Tunes survive explosions and falls off cliffs. Cartoon death is temporary by convention. But The Simpsons doesn't apply this rule consistently. When Maud Flanders died in season 11, she stayed dead. The show retired the character out of respect for the narrative consequences of her death, and because the voice actress Maggie Roswell had left the show over a pay dispute. When Bleeding Gums Murphy died, he stayed dead. When Fat Tony died in season 22, he had a heart attack and was immediately replaced by his cousin Fit Tony, who gained weight and became the new Fat Tony. The show maintains character death when it wants to. It has rules about who stays dead and who doesn't. And the fact that Hans Moleman is exempt from those rules, that he can die repeatedly without permanent consequence, suggests that his deaths aren't the same kind of death that applies to other Springfield residents. The driver's license is the key. Hans Moleman is listed as 31 years old but appears to be 80. If Moleman is a single human being, this is a continuity error or a visual gag about premature aging. But if Moleman is a colony designation, then the driver's license makes perfect sense. The license doesn't represent a person, it represents a position. Whatever Moleman was assigned surface duty 31 years ago, that's when the license was issued. It's a work permit, not a personal identification document. The individual holding the license has been replaced dozens of times, but the paperwork hasn't been updated because the colony doesn't understand or care about human bureaucratic systems. They obtained one license 3 decades ago and have been reusing it for every subsequent surface operative. The physical aging discrepancy supports this reading. If a new mole man arrives on the surface every time the previous one dies, and if these creatures age rapidly when exposed to sunlight, then each mole man would appear ancient within weeks of surfacing. They're underground creatures. Their biology is adapted to perpetual darkness, stable temperatures, and minimal UV radiation. The surface world is hostile to them. Sunlight accelerates their cellular degradation. Gravity pulls harder on bodies designed for lower pressures. Their eyes, evolved for darkness, can barely function in daylight, which is why every mole man wears the same thick glasses. They're not prescription lenses. They're surface survival equipment issued by the colony to every scout before deployment. The colony's purpose in Springfield is unclear, but the theory suggests they're either observing human society for unknown reasons or attempting a very slow, very badly executed infiltration. The mole men aren't conquering Springfield. They're studying it. Each surface operative gathers data, lives among humans for as long as their biology allows, and then dies. The data is transmitted back to the colony, and a new operative is sent up to continue the observation. The operative takes on the same identity, the same name, the same approximate appearance, because the colony believes that's how human identity works. They think Hans Moleman is a character that any of them can play, like a costume or a uniform. They don't understand that humans expect individuals to have consistent identities across time. They think if you wear the same glasses and answer to the same name, nobody will notice you're a different person. And nobody does notice. That's the most disturbing part. Nobody in Springfield has ever questioned why Hans Moleman keeps dying and coming back. Nobody has investigated. Nobody has remarked on the pattern. Nobody has said, "Hey, didn't Moleman die last week? How is he here?" The citizens of Springfield accept Moleman's perpetual resurrection without comment or concern, which either means they're too oblivious to notice, or they've been conditioned not to notice, or the colony is using some form of perception manipulation that prevents surface dwellers from recognizing the replacement cycle. Grandpa Abe's time traveling, which is canonical across multiple episodes, adds another layer. Several theories suggest that Abe's journeys through time have created ripples in Springfield's timeline that explain various plot holes and inconsistencies. If Abe's time travel disrupted the normal flow of cause and effect in Springfield, it could have created the conditions that allow the Moleman colony to operate undetected. The timeline distortions prevent anyone from holding a consistent memory of Moleman's deaths, because those deaths exist in timeline fragments that don't connect cleanly. Each Moleman death happens in a slightly different version of Springfield, and the residents' memories don't carry over between versions. They can't remember Moleman dying because their minds are constantly being overwritten by the next timeline iteration. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe the Moleman aren't aliens or time anomalies or interdimensional beings. Maybe they're exactly what their name says they are. Mole people. Underground humanoids who have lived beneath Springfield for centuries, predating the town itself, existing in tunnel networks that were there long before anyone built a nuclear power plant or a quick E-Mart above them. They've been watching humans from below for generations. They send scouts to the surface to gather information. The scouts are fragile, poorly adapted to sunlight, and die frequently. But the colony is vast. There are hundreds of them, maybe thousands, and they have been replacing fallen scouts with new ones for so long that Hans Moleman has become less a name and more a job title. Surface Observer number 847, Surface Observer number 848, Surface Observer number 849, each one wearing the same glasses, each one hunching the same way, each one dying on schedule and being replaced without anyone upstairs noticing. The show has never confirmed this theory. It probably never will. Hans Moleman is too useful as a disposable comedic element for the writers to give him a canonical backstory that would limit how they use him. But the evidence is consistent. The repeated deaths, the impossible age discrepancy, the underground naming convention, the physical characteristics of a subterranean organism, the complete absence of any Springfield resident acknowledging the pattern. Hans Moleman isn't dying. Hans Moleman are dying, plural. And the colony keeps sending more because whatever data they're collecting from the surface is worth the cost of losing an operative every few episodes. Somewhere beneath Springfield, in tunnels that predate the town's founding, a colony of beings that look like 80-year-old men but are biologically 31 is tracking every death, logging every observation, and preparing the next scout for deployment. The glasses are already laid out, the hunched posture is being rehearsed, the name is being practiced, and the next time Homer drives recklessly through downtown, or Sideshow Bob escapes from prison, or a parade float goes off course, Hans Moleman will be there to get hit. Not because he's unlucky, because it's his job. And when he dies, the next one will take his place. And the one after that. And the one after that. Because the colony doesn't stop. The observation never ends. And Hans Moleman, all of them, are always watching. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Springfield nuclear power plant and the theory that it doesn't actually generate power for anyone. That the entire facility is a government-sanctioned experiment in long-term radiation exposure on a civilian population. And Homer Simpson isn't an employee. He's a test subject. Let's start with the inspection. In a Season 2 episode, the show lays out the condition of the Springfield nuclear power plant in specific documented detail. State nuclear inspectors arrive at the facility and discover 342 safety violations. 342, not a handful, not a dozen. 342 distinct regulatory failures in a single inspection. The estimated cost to repair all of them is over $56 million. That's not a plant with maintenance problems. That's a plant that has never been maintained. A facility with 342 violations isn't operating at reduced capacity. It's operating in defiance of the physical laws that govern nuclear safety. And the response from the plant's owner, Charles Montgomery Burns, is not to fix the problems. It's to run for governor so he can eliminate the regulations that define the problems as problems. Think about what that means. The man who owns a nuclear power plant with over 300 safety violations does not consider those violations worth fixing. He considers the regulations that identify those violations worth eliminating. And his plan to eliminate them isn't revolution or bribery, though he's certainly capable of both. His plan is to become the governor of the state that regulates him, to occupy the political office that grants him the authority to rewrite the rules. And the show presents this plan as plausible. Burns launches a campaign. He hires political consultants. He runs television ads. He has the Simpson family over for dinner as a publicity stunt. He ties with the incumbent in the polls. He almost wins. The only thing that prevents Governor Burns from becoming a reality is Marge serving him a three-eyed fish at dinner, which is broadcast live on television and destroys his campaign overnight. The three-eyed fish is important. Its name is Blinky, and it lives in the lake behind the power plant, in water contaminated by nuclear runoff. The fish has three eyes, not because of natural mutation, because of direct sustained exposure to radioactive waste being dumped into the waterway by the Springfield nuclear power plant. Blinky is a living document of what the plant does to biological organisms, and Blinky is not the only evidence. The show has repeatedly established that the plant leaks radiation into the surrounding environment. Workers handle radioactive materials without proper protection. Waste containers sit open in hallways. Green glowing rods are visible in multiple episodes, casually placed in areas where employees eat lunch and take breaks. The plant's containment protocols are described as non-existent. The facility's design, according to various fan analyses and the show's own visual presentation, appears to be based on the Trojan nuclear power plant near Portland, Oregon, which was a real facility that closed in 1993 due to structural defects. There are also visual comparisons to the Hanford site in southeastern Washington, one of the most contaminated nuclear locations in the United States. Both of these are Pacific Northwest facilities, which aligns with the Oregon connection established in our Springfield segment. Now here's where the theory gets interesting. If the Springfield nuclear power plant is genuinely this dangerous, if it has over 300 safety violations, if it's leaking radiation into the environment, if it's producing mutant wildlife, if it's operated by a man who would rather become governor than fix a single problem, then why hasn't the federal government shut it down? Not the state government, not the local authorities, the federal government, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Department of Energy, the agencies that exist specifically to prevent exactly this kind of catastrophic regulatory failure. Where are they? They're absent, completely absent. In over 800 episodes, no federal nuclear agency has ever successfully intervened in the operations of the Springfield nuclear power plant. State inspectors have visited, local officials have complained, but the federal regulatory apparatus that oversees nuclear facilities in the United States has never, in 3.5 decades of canonical Simpsons episodes, shut down a plant that violates every rule they're supposed to enforce. And the theory suggests that's because the federal government doesn't want the plant shut down. They want it running exactly the way it is. The theory proposes that the Springfield nuclear power plant is a long-term study in what happens when a civilian population is exposed to low-level radiation over multiple generations. The government knows about the violations, they know about the waste, they know about Blinky and every other mutant organism in Springfield's waterways, and they're collecting data. Every birth defect, every cancer cluster, every behavioral anomaly, every impossible survival event is being documented by someone, somewhere, in a file that never gets released. Homer Simpson is the primary test subject because Homer Simpson is the most exposed human being in Springfield. He's the plant's safety inspector, a position that places him in direct contact with radioactive materials on a daily basis. And his hiring wasn't random. The show establishes in multiple episodes that Burns specifically wanted an incompetent safety inspector, someone who wouldn't report problems, someone who wouldn't ask questions, someone whose presence in the role would guarantee that the plant continued operating without interference. In Homer Goes to College, Season 5, Episode 3, Burns goes out of his way to keep Homer employed at the plant. When new regulators demand that Homer obtain a college degree or be replaced, Burns doesn't let Homer go. He helps Homer enroll in college. He actively works to ensure that Homer, specifically Homer, remains the safety inspector. Not because Homer is good at the job, because Homer is perfect for the experiment. He's a high-exposure subject with no awareness of his own exposure, no capacity to report it accurately, and no inclination to seek medical attention for symptoms he doesn't understand. And what are the symptoms? The show has documented them extensively without ever connecting them to a unified cause. Homer's cognitive impairment, while partially attributed to the crayon lodged in his brain, may also be a consequence of chronic radiation exposure. Radiation affects brain function. It impairs memory, reduces cognitive processing speed, and can cause personality changes. Homer's legendary stupidity might not be entirely organic. It might be partially environmental. The crayon started the process. Decades of daily radiation exposure completed it. Homer's physical durability is equally suspicious. He's been shot, stabbed, burned, crushed, electrocuted, run over, and subjected to every conceivable form of physical trauma, and he heals completely between episodes. Normal human beings don't recover from the injuries Homer sustains, but human beings with altered cellular biology might. Low-level radiation exposure over long periods can, in theory, trigger adaptive mutations. The body learns to repair damage faster because it's constantly being damaged. Homer's healing factor isn't cartoon physics. It's biological adaptation to a hostile environment. His cells have been irradiated for so long that they've developed accelerated repair mechanisms that allow him to survive things that would kill an unexposed human. The same pattern appears in the rest of the family. Bart and Lisa have lived in Springfield their entire lives, drinking the water, breathing the air, eating food grown in irradiated soil. Maggie was born in Springfield. She's been exposed to the environment since her first breath. And Marge, who has lived in Springfield since childhood, has maintained an appearance that doesn't change over 3 decades, which could be genetic, could be the floating timeline, or could be the same kind of cellular stasis that keeps Burns alive at the power plant. The Simpsons aren't just a family, they're a multi-generational radiation study. Dr. Hibbert, Springfield's primary physician, is another component of this theory. Hibbert is competent. He's a real doctor with real medical knowledge. But he never connects the dots. He never tells Homer that his cognitive symptoms are consistent with radiation exposure. He never investigates the cancer rates in Springfield. He never reports the birth defects, the behavioral anomalies, the impossible medical recoveries. He does his job, treats his patients, and never once asks why the town he serves has medical outcomes that don't match any normal population. Either Hibbert is spectacularly unobservant, or he's been instructed not to investigate. Either he's incompetent or he's compliant. Dr. Nick Riviera, Springfield's other medical professional, is the opposite. He's flagrantly incompetent, operates without proper credentials, and performs medical procedures that would be considered malpractice in any legitimate facility. His presence in Springfield serves a purpose within the theory. If the government is running a long-term radiation study, they need medical infrastructure that documents symptoms without diagnosing causes. They need doctors who treat individual complaints without investigating systemic patterns. They need a medical community that's too incompetent or too compromised to ask the right questions. Hibbert doesn't investigate because he's been told not to. Riviera doesn't investigate because he can't. Between the two of them, Springfield has a medical system that provides just enough care to keep the subjects alive without ever identifying what's actually making them sick. The physical evidence extends beyond the plant itself. Springfield's geography includes a toxic waste dump, a tire fire that has been burning continuously for decades, and waterways contaminated with industrial and nuclear waste. The town's air quality, water quality, and soil composition would all be classified as hazardous by any legitimate environmental assessment. And yet the residents don't leave. They stay, they raise families, they eat the food, drink the water, breathe the air, and adapt, or mutate, or both. The tire fire is particularly telling. Nobody knows who started it. Nobody has successfully extinguished it. It burns perpetually, pumping carcinogens into Springfield's atmosphere year after year, and the town has simply accepted it as a permanent feature of the landscape. The tire fire isn't a running gag, it's a delivery system. It ensures that every resident of Springfield, regardless of their proximity to the nuclear plant, receives a continuous baseline dose of toxic exposure. The plant handles the radiation, the tire fire handles the chemical contamination. Together, they create an environment where the entire population is being exposed to a cocktail of hazards that no responsible government would allow. Unless the government is the one running the experiment. Unless every safety violation at the plant, every chemical spill, every unextinguished fire, every three-eyed fish is a data point in a study that started before the current residents were born and will continue long after they're gone. Burns isn't the villain of this story. Burns is the site manager. He runs the plant because someone told him to run the plant, and he's too old, too rich, and too disconnected from modern regulatory frameworks to realize that the facility he oversees isn't generating power, it's generating subjects. The most damning evidence is the simplest. Springfield has a nuclear power plant that violates every federal regulation governing nuclear facilities. That plant has been operating for decades. No federal agency has shut it down. The most logical explanation is that a federal agency doesn't want it shut down, and the most logical reason for that is that the same agency is the one operating it. Homer Simpson goes to work every morning at a facility that is slowly destroying his brain, his body, and his community. He doesn't know this because he can't know this. His cognitive impairment, whether caused by the crayon, the radiation, or both, prevents him from understanding what's being done to him. He is the perfect subject, exposed daily. Unable to comprehend his exposure, unable to report it, unable to leave. Because where would he go? His house is in Springfield, his family is in Springfield, his friends are in Springfield. Everything he knows is within the boundaries of the experiment. The Springfield nuclear power plant doesn't generate electricity for a town. It generates data for a government. And every morning, Homer Simpson puts on his white shirt, clips on his radiation badge, and walks through the doors of a facility that isn't employing him. It's studying him. And it has been studying him for 37 seasons across 800 episodes, and it will continue studying him through season 40 because the experiment isn't over. The experiment is never over. The data is too valuable. The subjects are too compliant, and the man who runs the plant is too old to die and too rich to care. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Maggie Simpson and the theory that she is the most dangerous member of the Simpson family. Not the most destructive, that's Homer. Not the most rebellious, that's Bart. Not the most intellectually formidable, that's Lisa. Maggie is the most dangerous because she operates without oversight, without suspicion, and without anyone in Springfield understanding what she's capable of. She's a baby, she sucks a pacifier, she crawls, she doesn't speak. And she's the only character in 37 seasons of The Simpsons who has shot someone and gotten away with it completely. The Who Shot Mr. Burns mystery is the foundation of this theory, and its resolution is one of the most remarkable moments in television history. The first part aired as the season 6 finale on May 21, 1995. The second part aired as the Season 7 premiere on September 17, 1995. Between those two dates, millions of viewers spent an entire summer trying to figure out who pulled the trigger. Fox ran a national promotional campaign. Viewers were invited to participate in a contest to guess the shooter. The prize was being animated into an episode of the show. The mystery was treated as a genuine interactive television event, modeled on the famous Who Shot J.R. Carter's cliffhanger from Dallas. And here's what the DVD commentary for those episodes reveals. Not a single person who entered the official contest guessed correctly. Nobody. The producers confirmed that they were aware of one person who posted the correct answer on a Simpsons newsgroup online the night the first part aired. But due to contest regulations, a winner had to be selected from a random sample of entries. Since the selected winner didn't have the right answer, they were paid a cash prize instead of being animated into the show. The producers wanted to track down the person who actually got it right, but the correct answer came from someone using a college internet account that was deactivated over the summer, and they were never able to find the person. The showrunners issued an invitation on the DVD commentary for this individual to come forward, and as far as public record shows, nobody ever did. The shooter was Maggie, a 1-year-old baby. She found Burns's revolver after it fell from his holster during a confrontation. She picked it up, she pulled the trigger. The bullet hit Burns in the chest. Burns collapsed on a sundial in the town square, his arms pointing to the letters M and S, which everyone interpreted as an accusation against specific suspects. But Burns himself later admitted that the arm positions were accidental, that he wasn't pointing at anyone. The M and S meant nothing. The shooting was committed by a baby, witnessed by no one, and resolved by a confession from Burns that he simply happened to reach toward the letters M and S as he fell. The official narrative is that Maggie shot Burns accidentally. She's a baby. She doesn't understand firearms. She saw a shiny object, picked it up, and it went off. The show presents this as a darkly comic resolution to a mystery that had been intentionally designed to be unsolvable from the clues given. And that narrative works. It's clean, it's funny, it's surprising. But if you look at Maggie's track record across the rest of the series, the word accidental starts to feel inadequate. Maggie has saved Homer's life on multiple occasions. She has demonstrated problem-solving abilities that exceed what developmental psychology would consider possible for a child her age. In one memorable sequence, she navigates a complex environment, identifies threats, and neutralizes them using available resources. She's not just reacting to stimuli, she's assessing situations, making decisions, and executing plans. These are cognitive functions that require working memory, spatial reasoning, threat assessment, and motor coordination. A 1-year-old baby should not possess any of these capabilities. Maggie possesses all of them. Her first word is another piece of evidence that the show deployed with surgical precision. In Lisa's first word, Season 4, Episode 10, the entire episode revolves around the question of when Maggie will speak for the first time. The other characters discuss it, they wait for it, they try to encourage it. And then, in the final scene of the episode, after everyone has gone to sleep, Maggie removes her pacifier and says a single word. Daddy. The voice was provided by Elizabeth Taylor, one of the most famous actresses in the world, in an uncredited performance. But the detail that matters isn't who provided the voice. It's when Maggie chose to speak. She waited until she was alone. She waited until no one was watching. She demonstrated that she has the physical capacity for speech and the cognitive capacity for language. And she deliberately concealed both of these abilities from every member of her family. Why? The theory suggests that Maggie is the smartest Simpson, surpassing even Lisa, and that her silence is not a developmental delay, but a strategic choice. Lisa chose intelligence over happiness and became the most miserable member of the family. Homer chose ignorance and became the happiest. Maggie, observing both of these outcomes from her unique position as the silent, overlooked, chronically underestimated baby in the corner, made a third choice. She chose to be invisible, to watch everything, understand everything, and reveal nothing. Because invisibility is power. Nobody suspects the baby. Nobody watches the baby. Nobody asks the baby questions or demands the baby explain herself or holds the baby accountable for anything. Maggie has achieved the perfect strategic position. Maximum information access with zero accountability. Consider the Burns shooting through this lens. The official explanation is that Maggie found a gun and it went off accidentally. But Maggie had to locate the gun, which had fallen from Burns's holster during a confrontation that she witnessed. She had to pick it up, which requires both the manual dexterity to grip a firearm and the understanding that the object she's holding is functionally different from a toy. She had to aim it, even if imprecisely, in the general direction of a target, and she had to apply enough pressure to the trigger to discharge the weapon. Each of these steps individually requires cognitive processing. Together, they describe a sequence of actions that looks a lot less like an accident and a lot more like a decision. Burns had just stolen candy from Maggie. This is canonical. Before the shooting, Burns takes a lollipop from Maggie. It's a small, petty act of cruelty consistent with Burns's character. But from Maggie's perspective, an older, more powerful individual just took something from her by force. Maggie, who the theory posits is far more intelligent and aware than anyone realizes, recognized the threat, identified a weapon, acquired it, and used it. Not randomly, not accidentally, deliberately, because Burns took something from her, and Maggie, the silent observer who reveals nothing and fears nothing, decided that wasn't going to stand. The fact that nobody suspected Maggie isn't just a plot point. It's evidence of how effectively she has maintained her cover. Every other suspect in Springfield was investigated. Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, Smithers, Tito Puente, groundskeeper Willie, virtually every citizen with a grudge against Burns was questioned, accused, or investigated. Nobody looked at the baby. Nobody even considered the possibility. Because babies don't shoot people. That's what everyone believes. And Maggie, who understands exactly what everyone believes and how to exploit those beliefs, has been operating under that assumption her entire life. The pacifier is the final detail, and it's the one that ties everything together. Maggie's pacifier is her most iconic visual element. She's rarely seen without it. She sucks on it constantly. It's been the subject of entire episodes, and the theory suggests it's not a comfort object. It's a gag, literally. Maggie keeps the pacifier in her mouth because it prevents her from speaking. She has demonstrated the ability to speak. She chose to do it once, in private, and then went back to silence. The pacifier ensures that she can't accidentally slip up. It's a physical barrier between her intelligence and the outside world. A muzzle she applies to herself every morning to maintain the fiction that she's just a baby who can't talk, can't think, and can't act. Remove the pacifier, and Maggie speaks. Remove the pacifier, and Maggie's intelligence becomes visible. Remove the pacifier, and every person in Springfield who has ever ignored her, dismissed her, or underestimated her would have to confront the fact that the baby in the corner has been watching them, understanding them, and judging them for her entire life. The pacifier isn't a comfort, it's a disguise. And Maggie wears it for the same reason Clark Kent wears glasses, because the difference between being invisible and being the most dangerous person in the room is one small piece of equipment that nobody thinks to remove. Maggie Simpson shot Mr. Burns. She did it deliberately. She's been speaking since she was 1 year old and chose to stop. She's saved her father's life multiple times using cognitive abilities that shouldn't exist in a child her age. She observes everything. She reveals nothing. She maintains the perfect cover of being a silent, helpless infant while possessing an intelligence that may exceed every other member of her family. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 37 seasons. And in all that time, not a single person in Springfield has figured out what she is. Not Homer, not Marge, not Lisa, who's supposed to be the smart one, not Burns, who learned firsthand what happens when you underestimate her, not the writers, who treat her capabilities as isolated jokes rather than a consistent pattern. Nobody has put it together, and Maggie, sitting silently in her high chair, pacifier firmly in place, watching everything with those wide, unblinking eyes, wouldn't have it any other way. The most dangerous Simpson isn't the one who causes the most damage. It's the one nobody sees coming. And nobody ever sees Maggie coming. She makes sure of that. She's been making sure of that since the day she was born. And she'll keep making sure of it for as long as the show continues, because the moment someone figures out what Maggie Simpson really is, the game is over. And Maggie's not done playing, not by a long shot. Pun very much intended. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the floating timeline and the theory that Springfield isn't just a town that doesn't age, it's a town that's trapped. locked in a temporal loop by someone with the means, the motive, and the technology to keep an entire population frozen in place while the rest of the world moves on without them. And the most terrifying part isn't that it's happening, it's that nobody in Springfield can tell. The Simpsons operates on what the show's own creators call a floating timeline. This is a standard narrative device used by long-running animated series to avoid the problem of character aging. Characters don't get older, birthdays happen but ages don't increment, flashbacks get reassigned to newer decades so the characters' backstories stay current. The official explanation is simple and practical. The show needs Bart to always be 10 because a 30-year-old Bart wouldn't generate the same comedy. Lisa needs to be 8 because her precocious genius works at that specific age. Maggie needs to be a baby because her silence and vulnerability are narrative tools. Homer needs to be somewhere around 38 because he needs to be old enough to have a career and young enough to be physically active. The floating timeline serves the show's creative needs. It's a feature, not a bug. But within the universe of the show, the floating timeline creates a paradox that the writers have never resolved. Events happen, consequences persist. Maud Flanders dies in season 11 and stays dead. Ned becomes a widower and remains one. Lisa becomes a vegetarian in season 7 and is still a vegetarian in season 37. Apu marries Manjula, has octuplets, and the children exist in subsequent episodes. Milhouse's parents divorce, and that divorce affects his character across multiple seasons. The show maintains continuity for significant life events. Things happen, and they stick. But time doesn't advance. Maud dies, but nobody ages past the moment of her death. The octuplets are born, but never grow. Milhouse's parents split, but Milhouse remains the same age he was when it happened. The show wants to have its narrative cake and eat its temporal one too. It wants the emotional weight of permanent consequences without the structural requirement of acknowledging that consequences exist inside time and time moves forward. The result is a world where things happen, but nothing changes. Where people die, but nobody gets older. Where decades pass, but the calendar stays the same. The floating timeline explains this as a narrative convention. The theory explains it as a curse. Here's the evidence. Homer and Marge's youth has been depicted in multiple flashback episodes, and those flashbacks keep moving forward in time. Originally, Homer and Marge were teenagers in the 1970s. Their early relationship involved disco, bell-bottoms, and cultural references appropriate to that era. Then, as the show continued and the 1970s receded further into history, the writers updated the flashbacks. Homer and Marge became teenagers in the 1980s, then the 1990s. In more recent seasons, their youth has been pushed into the 2000s. Their entire romantic history, the foundational story of the series, keeps being rewritten to match the current decade, and nobody in the show notices. Nobody says, "Wait, didn't we meet in 1974? Why does everyone remember it as 1995? The flashbacks change, and the characters accept the new version as though the old one never existed. This isn't a continuity error. This is reality revision. Someone or something is periodically resetting the timeline of Springfield so that the characters' backstories align with the present day. The revisions aren't random. They're systematic. They affect every character simultaneously. They overwrite previous memories with new ones. And they happen without anyone in Springfield perceiving the change. Professor Frink has time travel capability. This is canonical across multiple episodes. He's built machines that can observe the future, transmit information across time, and physically transport people to different eras. He's not the only one. Multiple characters have accessed time travel through various means throughout the series. The technology exists in Springfield. The knowledge exists. The capability exists. Someone in Springfield has the ability to manipulate the flow of time, and the floating timeline is what it looks like from inside the manipulation. Mr. Burns is the prime suspect because Mr. Burns is the person who benefits most from Springfield's temporal stasis. As we established earlier, Burns may be over 140 years old. He runs a nuclear power plant that sustains his biology. His wealth depends on a stable, controllable population that doesn't age, doesn't leave, and doesn't develop the institutional memory required to hold him accountable for his crimes. Every generation that grows up remembering Burns' atrocities is a generation that could organize against him. But if the generation never grows up, if the children stay children and the adults stay adults and nobody accumulates enough lived experience to see the pattern, then Burns remains untouchable. The floating timeline doesn't just prevent aging, it prevents revolution. Think about what would happen if time moved normally in Springfield. Homer would retire. Bart would grow up, move away, maybe come back, maybe not. Lisa would leave for college and never return because Springfield has nothing to offer a woman of her intelligence. Maggie would grow into whatever she's destined to become. The power plant would face new safety inspectors, new regulations, new oversight. Burns' generation of control would end because the people he controls would eventually gain enough power, enough knowledge, enough resources to challenge him. Time is the enemy of tyrants. The only way to maintain absolute control is to eliminate time itself. And that's exactly what the floating timeline does. The Stonecutters are another potential culprit. The secret society that Burns belongs to, the one that controls the British Crown and keeps the metric system down, has both the resources and the motivation to maintain temporal control over Springfield. If Springfield is a containment zone, as other theories in this video have suggested, then the Stonecutters would need a mechanism to prevent the contained subjects from evolving past their usefulness. Freezing time accomplishes this. The subjects remain static, their behavior remains predictable, their memories remain manageable, and the Stonecutters can study a population that never changes, extracting data from a controlled experiment that runs indefinitely. The evidence for temporal manipulation appears in small details that the show treats as jokes, but which viewed collectively form a pattern. Characters occasionally reference events from previous episodes and then get confused about when those events happened. The townspeople sometimes behave as though they've forgotten major incidents that affected the entire community, acting within weeks as though catastrophic events never occurred. The show has been described by its own fans as having a reset button quality, where each episode ends with the status quo restored regardless of what happened during the previous 22 minutes. Houses are rebuilt, injuries heal, relationships reset, money that was lost is regained, people who died come back. The reset isn't lazy writing. The reset is the temporal loop correcting itself. Every time something happens in Springfield that would permanently alter the town's trajectory, the loop activates and restores the default configuration. Burns gets shot, the loop heals him. The town is destroyed, the loop rebuilds it. A character's behavior changes permanently, the loop nudges them back to baseline. The floating timeline isn't a narrative convention, it's a machine. And somebody built it. The loop has rules. Certain events are allowed to persist because they don't threaten the overall stability of the system. Maud can die because her death doesn't change the fundamental dynamics of Springfield. Lisa can become a vegetarian because dietary choices don't threaten the power structure. Apu can have children because the children don't disrupt anything. But nobody can age, nobody can leave permanently, nobody can accumulate enough power or knowledge to challenge the existing order. Those changes get corrected, those events get erased, those timelines get pruned, and the loop has a maintenance cycle. The flashback revisions, the ones that keep pushing Homer and Marge's youth forward in time, are maintenance operations. The loop periodically updates the backstory database to prevent temporal inconsistencies from accumulating past a manageable threshold. If the characters' memories were allowed to extend back to the 1970s while the present day is 2026, the 50-year gap would start producing cognitive dissonance that even the loop couldn't suppress. People would start wondering why they remember events from half a century ago, but don't look a day over 40. So the loop rewrites the backstories, moves the memories forward, compresses the timeline, keeps everything within a plausible window of about 20 to 25 years so that nobody asks uncomfortable questions about why they haven't aged. Homer is the most affected because Homer is the most exposed to the mechanism that powers the loop. If the loop is powered by the nuclear plant, as the radiation theory suggests, then Homer's daily proximity to the power source would make him the most susceptible to its effects. This explains his memory problems, his inability to learn from past mistakes, his perpetual confusion about basic facts of his own life. Homer isn't stupid, he's being wiped. Every night while he sleeps, the loop scrubs his short-term memory and resets his cognitive baseline to the default Homer configuration. He wakes up every morning as the same Homer he was yesterday, with no accumulated wisdom, no lasting growth, no permanent change. He's not a man who fails to learn, he's a man whose lessons are being stolen from him while he sleeps. And this connects back to where we started 3 hours ago with the coma theory. If Homer has been unconscious since 1993, then the floating timeline is his brain's inability to let time move forward. He's dreaming a world where his children never grow up because facing their adulthood means facing the decades he's missed. If Homer is awake, if Springfield is real, then the floating timeline is something being done to him and everyone he loves by a force they can't perceive and can't resist. Either way, the conclusion is the same. Time in Springfield is broken. It has been broken since the show began. And nobody inside the loop can fix it because nobody inside the loop can see it. The residents of Springfield are not characters in a television show. They're prisoners in a temporal cage. They live, they laugh, they love, they suffer, they endure. But they don't grow. They never grow. They're trapped in an endless present tense that stretches back 37 seasons and forward through at least season 40. And they will remain trapped for as long as someone, whether it's Burns or the Stonecutters or the government or the loop itself, decides that Springfield's stasis is more valuable than Springfield's freedom. Bart will be 10 forever. Lisa will be 8 forever. Maggie will be 1 forever. Homer will make the same mistakes forever. Marge will forgive him forever. And the sun will rise over Springfield every morning, illuminating a town that looks exactly the same as it did yesterday, and the day before, and the decade before that, because in Springfield, tomorrow is just today wearing a different hat. And nobody knows. Nobody will ever know. Because knowing would break the loop, and breaking the loop would end the show. And ending the show would end Springfield, and ending Springfield would end them, so they don't know. They can't know, and the loop keeps turning, and the timeline keeps floating, and Bart keeps writing on the chalkboard, and Homer keeps strangling Bart, and Lisa keeps playing her saxophone, and Maggie keeps sucking her pacifier, and the credits roll, and next week it happens again, and the week after that, and the week after that, forever. That's the theory. Springfield is trapped. The timeline is a cage. And the cage is beautiful, and the cage is funny, and the cage has won 37 Emmy Awards and been renewed through season 40. And the cage will keep running for as long as there are viewers to watch it and subjects to study and a loop to maintain. Because The Simpsons isn't a show about a family, it's a show about a prison that looks like a town that feels like a home. And the prisoners love their cage because the cage is all they've ever known. Now let me tie all of this together, because these aren't 10 separate theories. They're one theory told from 10 different angles. Homer is in a coma, dreaming a world where his family never ages and his town can never be found on a map. Or Homer is awake, trapped in a temporal loop maintained by a nuclear power plant that's secretly a government experiment, overseen by an immortal billionaire who keeps the population docile through radiation exposure and institutional incompetence. Bart is a genius pretending to be stupid. Lisa is a genius who refused to pretend. Maggie is the smartest one of all, hiding behind a pacifier and a pair of wide eyes. Moe answers the phone because he needs to hear a human voice, even if that voice is mocking him. Hans Moleman dies and comes back because he was never one person to begin with. The predictions are real because the writers are too smart for the future to surprise them. And Springfield doesn't exist on any map because it doesn't exist in any state. It exists in a loop. A beautiful, horrifying 37-season loop that resets every Sunday night at 8 o'clock Eastern on Fox. The Simpsons has been airing since December 17, 1989. It premiered with a Christmas special called Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire. It has since produced over 800 episodes, won a Guinness World Record for most guest stars in a television series with 810 as of April 2020, generated $1 billion merchandising industry, coined words that appear in the Oxford English Dictionary, including dough, which was added in 2001, and been renewed through season 40, securing its run well into the late 2020s. It is the longest-running American primetime scripted television series by seasons, having surpassed Gunsmoke with the premiere of season 21 in September of 2009. And in all that time, across all those episodes, with all those writers and all those characters and all those stories, nobody in Springfield has ever asked the one question that would shatter everything. Why don't we age? Why don't our children grow up? Why does every disaster reset by the next episode? Why can't anyone find us on a map? Why does the man who runs the power plant look like he's been alive for 200 years? Why does the baby never speak? Why does the bartender keep falling for the same prank? Why do the predictions keep coming true? Why does everything feel like it's happening for the first time, every time, forever? They don't ask because they can't. The loop won't let them. The coma won't let them. The cage won't let them. Whatever explanation you choose, the result is the same. Springfield is a place where questions aren't asked because the answers would destroy the world. And so the citizens of Springfield go about their lives day after day, episode after episode, season after season, living in a reality that doesn't work, surrounded by evidence that something is fundamentally wrong, and never ever looking up long enough to see it. That's The Simpsons. That's what 37 seasons of conspiracy theories amount to. A town that can't find itself, a family that can't grow up, a man who might be dreaming, and a show that will never end because the loop was designed to run forever. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Moving on to Ned Flanders and the theory that the nicest man in Springfield is a deep-cover government operative who was planted on Evergreen Terrace to monitor Homer Simpson. Not as a friend, not as a neighbor, as a handler. Because if any of the previous theories in this video are true, if Springfield is a government experiment, if the nuclear plant is generating test subjects, if Homer is the primary data point in a multi-generational radiation study, then someone needs to be watching Homer at home. Someone needs to be close enough to observe his daily behavior, his family dynamics, his psychological baseline, his physical deterioration. Someone needs to live next door. Ned Flanders moved to 744 Evergreen Terrace at some point before the series began. The show has never provided a detailed origin story for when or why the Flanders family chose that specific house on that specific street. We know that Ned is married to Maude, that he has 2 sons named Rod and Todd, that he runs the Leftorium, a store specializing in products for left-handed people, and that he is the most aggressively, relentlessly, pathologically nice person in Springfield. He never swears, he never loses his temper in a way that causes lasting harm. He attends church every Sunday, he volunteers, he donates, he helps his neighbors without being asked. He is, by every available metric, the perfect neighbor. And that perfection is the first red flag. Nobody is that nice, not consistently, not across 37 seasons. Not in a town where his next-door neighbor routinely destroys his property, insults his family, borrows his possessions without returning them, and treats him with open contempt. Homer has been a terrible neighbor to Ned Flanders for the entire run of the series. He's damaged Ned's house, he's ruined Ned's events, he's mocked Ned's fate. He's taken advantage of Ned's kindness so many times that the pattern itself has become a joke. And Ned keeps coming back. He keeps helping. He keeps forgiving. He keeps being exactly the kind of neighbor that Homer doesn't deserve and never earns. Why? The show's answer is that Ned is a genuinely good Christian man whose faith compels him to love his neighbor regardless of how that neighbor treats him. And that's a valid character reading. It works within the show's comedic framework, but it doesn't explain the surveillance. Because Ned watches Homer constantly. He knows Homer's schedule. He knows when Homer leaves for work. He knows when Homer comes home. He knows what Homer eats, what Homer drinks, what Homer watches on television. Ned has been depicted looking out his window at the Simpson house in dozens of episodes. Sometimes this is played as idle, neighborly observation. Sometimes it's played for comedy. But the frequency and specificity of Ned's knowledge about Homer's daily life goes beyond what a normal neighbor would possess, even a nosy one. Ned doesn't just know that Homer exists next door, he knows what Homer's doing at any given moment. He has real-time intelligence on Homer's movements and behaviors. Ned's military background is canonical. While the show has focused more on his religious identity, Ned has demonstrated physical capabilities that are inconsistent with a mild-mannered shopkeeper. He's in excellent physical condition. His body, when revealed in certain episodes, is described as remarkably muscular and fit for a man his age. He's calm under pressure. He's capable of decisive action in crisis situations. He's organized. He's disciplined. He maintains a routine with a precision that suggests professional training. These aren't the characteristics of a small business owner who sells left-handed scissors. These are the characteristics of someone who has been trained for field work. The Leftorium itself is a curious business, a store devoted entirely to left-handed products in a small town. The economics of this business model don't make sense. Left-handed people constitute roughly 10% of the population. In a town the size of Springfield, Ned's customer base would be tiny. The store has been shown struggling financially in multiple episodes. It's not a viable business. So why does Ned keep running it? Because the store isn't the mission. The store is the cover. It gives Ned a reason to be in Springfield, a reason to have a flexible schedule, a reason to be home during the day when Homer might be doing something worth observing. The Leftorium doesn't need to make money because Ned's real income comes from somewhere else. When Maude died in season 11, the show presented this as an accident. She was hit by a t-shirt cannon at a racing event and fell from the bleachers. It was played for shock, then grief, then eventually dark comedy. But Maude's death fundamentally changed Ned's situation. Before Maude's death, Ned was a family man with a wife, 2 children, and a stable domestic life. After Maude's death, Ned became a single father, more isolated, more focused on his children and his faith, and more available to dedicate time to his real assignment. Maude's death wasn't an accident in the conspiracy theory framework. It was an extraction. Maude was a liability. She was too close to Ned's real identity, too likely to eventually notice that her husband's interest in the Simpson family went beyond neighborly concern, too smart to be fooled forever. So she was removed, not by the agency, by the narrative. The show killed Maude because Maude was the one character who could have exposed Ned's true purpose, and keeping her alive was a risk the operation couldn't afford. Ned's relationship with his children supports the theory. Rod and Todd Flanders are the most sheltered, most controlled, most meticulously managed children in Springfield. They don't watch violent television. They don't eat junk food. They don't play rough. They're kept in a state of perpetual innocence that goes beyond strict parenting and enters the territory of information control. Ned doesn't just raise his children, he quarantines them. He ensures they never develop the independent thinking, the rebellious instincts, the curiosity that might lead them to question their father's behavior. Rod and Todd are not being raised. They're being managed. They're assets in a cover story, and Ned maintains them with the same precision he maintains everything else. The theory explains Ned's relationship with Homer as professional rather than personal. Ned doesn't like Homer. Ned tolerates Homer because Homer is his assignment. Every barbecue invitation, every Lent power tool, every act of forgiveness after Homer destroys his property is Ned, maintaining proximity to his target. If Ned confronted Homer, if he lost his temper, if he set boundaries, Homer might distance himself. Homer might stop coming over. Homer might stop sharing information about his life, his family, his work at the plant. Ned can't afford that. He needs Homer close. He needs Homer comfortable. He needs Homer to believe that Ned is a harmless, slightly annoying nice guy who can be taken advantage of without consequence. Because as long as Homer believes that, Homer keeps talking. And as long as Homer keeps talking, Ned keeps collecting data. The darkest implication of this theory is what it means for Ned's faith. Ned Flanders is defined by his Christianity. His relationship with God is the core of his character. Every decision he makes, every interaction he has, every moral framework he applies to the world is filtered through his religious beliefs. If Ned is a government agent, then his faith is either a cover, the deepest and most sustained performance in the show's history, or it's genuine. And Ned has found a way to reconcile his service to God with his service to an agency that's conducting unethical experiments on an unsuspecting civilian population. The second option is more interesting and more disturbing. What if Ned genuinely believes that what he's doing is righteous? What if he was recruited by an agency that told him his mission was to protect Homer's family, to watch over them, to ensure their safety during a dangerous experiment? What if Ned's faith isn't a cover but a coping mechanism? He prays every night because he knows what he's doing is wrong, and prayer is the only way he can live with himself. He goes to church because church is the one place where the weight of his deception lifts slightly. He is relentlessly nice to Homer because the alternative, acknowledging that his niceness is a professional obligation rather than a genuine impulse, would destroy him. Ned Flanders isn't the nicest man in Springfield. He's the loneliest. He's a man living a double life in a town that thinks it knows him, performing kindness as a cover for surveillance, raising his children in a sterile environment because he can't risk them discovering the truth, and mourning a wife whose death may have been engineered by the people he works for. He sits in his perfect house at 744 Evergreen Terrace, looks out his window at the Simpson family, and writes his reports. He's been doing it for 37 seasons. He'll keep doing it through season 40. And every time Homer says, "Stupid Flanders," Ned absorbs the insult, smiles his practiced smile, and thinks about the mission. Because the mission is all that matters. The mission is the only thing that's real. Everything else, the leftorium, the faith, the friendliness, the forgiveness, is just the cover. And the cover has to hold. It has to hold forever. Because if Ned Flanders breaks character, if he drops the mask even once, the entire operation collapses. And Ned Flanders doesn't break. He doodly doesn't. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Kent Brockman, Channel 6 News, and the theory that Springfield's local news station isn't reporting reality, it's creating it. Every broadcast from Kent Brockman's desk doesn't describe what happened in Springfield. It tells Springfield what to remember, and the town's collective consciousness reshapes itself to match whatever Kent says, regardless of what actually occurred. Let's start with the evidence that Springfield's population is abnormally susceptible to media influence, because this isn't subtle. Throughout the show, the citizens of Springfield have demonstrated a consistent, pathological inability to evaluate information critically. They form mobs at the slightest provocation. They accept absurd claims without verification. They shift their beliefs, their behaviors, and their loyalties based entirely on what they most recently heard from an authority figure. This isn't normal human behavior, even in a cartoon. The Simpsons has always been a satire of American culture, and media manipulation is one of its favorite targets. But what if the satire is also the mechanism? What if Kent Brockman isn't just a parody of sensationalist news anchors? What if he's the tool through which Springfield's reality is actively maintained? Kent Brockman has been the face of Channel 6 News for the entire run of the series. He's delivered thousands of broadcasts. He's reported on every major and minor event in Springfield's history. He's a household presence. His face and voice are woven into the daily experience of every Springfield resident. And his reporting is terrible. He sensationalizes, he exaggerates. He reports speculation as fact. He once famously welcomed our new insect overlords during a misinterpreted space mission broadcast, switching his loyalty to a perceived alien invasion before anyone could verify what was actually happening. That moment is played for comedy, but it reveals something important about Kent's character. He doesn't report what's true. He reports what he thinks will play well. And Springfield accepts whatever he says. The mob behavior is the strongest evidence. Springfield forms angry mobs more often than any fictional community in television history. Characters will be peacefully going about their business, and then someone makes a statement, usually Kent Brockman on the news, and within minutes the entire town has formed a mob complete with torches and pitchforks. The speed of these mob formations is impossible. People don't organize that quickly. They don't shift from calm to violent that seamlessly, unless they're being triggered, unless the broadcast itself contains a signal, a frequency, a pattern of language that activates a pre-programmed response in the Springfield population. Consider how often Springfield suffers catastrophic events that are completely forgotten by the following episode. The town has been destroyed, rebuilt, invaded, flooded, burned, overrun by zombies, and subjected to every conceivable disaster across 37 seasons. And every time, the next episode begins as though nothing happened. The town is intact. The buildings are standing. The residents are going about their normal business. There's no reconstruction. There's no mourning. There's no institutional memory of the disaster. It's as if someone erased the event from the collective consciousness of every person in Springfield and replaced it with normalcy. Channel 6 News is the mechanism for that erasure. After every catastrophic event, Kent Brockman delivers a broadcast that establishes the new normal. Whatever happened last week is no longer part of Springfield's shared memory. The news doesn't reference it. The citizens don't discuss it. Reality, as defined by Kent Brockman's most recent broadcast, supersedes whatever the residents actually experienced. Their brains don't fight this because their brains have been conditioned, possibly through decades of exposure to whatever signal Channel 6 embeds in its broadcasts, to accept the news anchor's version of events as the definitive record. This theory explains one of the most consistent inconsistencies in The Simpsons. Characters behave as though they have no long-term memory of previous episodes' events. Homer doesn't learn from his mistakes because he doesn't remember making them. Bart doesn't build on previous growth because his growth is erased between episodes. The entire town experiences a collective amnesia that resets them to their default psychological configuration every week. And the reset coincides with the next news cycle. Kent Brockman delivers the new reality. Springfield accepts it. And the previous episode might as well have never happened. The physical infrastructure of media saturation in Springfield supports this reading. Television is everywhere. It's in every home, it's in every bar, it's in every public space. The Simpsons household always has the television on. Homer watches it obsessively. Bart watches it constantly. Even Lisa, who considers herself above popular media, is regularly exposed to Channel 6 broadcasts through proximity. The citizens of Springfield cannot escape the signal because the signal is everywhere. It's in the background of every scene, it's the ambient noise of Springfield life. Even when characters aren't actively watching television, the television is on. The broadcast is reaching them. Kent Brockman isn't a journalist. He's a broadcaster in the most literal sense. He broadcasts a signal. That signal doesn't inform, it programs. And Springfield's population, exposed to that signal continuously since birth, has lost the ability to distinguish between what Kent Brockman says happened and what actually happened. For the citizens of Springfield, there is no difference. Kent Brockman's reality is reality. Whatever he reports is true. Whatever he doesn't report didn't happen. And whatever he tells them to forget, they forget. The show itself seems aware of this dynamic. In multiple episodes, characters have made meta-observations about the news controlling their behavior. Lisa has questioned media influence. Bart has manipulated media coverage for personal gain. Homer has been both a victim and a beneficiary of Kent Brockman's reporting. But these moments of awareness never last. By the next episode, the characters are back to accepting whatever Channel 6 tells them without question, because the signal doesn't allow sustained resistance. You can notice it for a moment, the way you might notice a ringing in your ears, but the moment passes, the next broadcast begins, and the awareness dissolves. The commercial breaks might be the most insidious component. Between every news segment, Channel 6 runs advertisements. These aren't just revenue generators, they're reinforcement cycles. Every commercial break gives the signal time to reset, time to deepen its hold, time to prepare the viewer for the next reality update. The commercials themselves might contain embedded instructions, subliminal patterns that strengthen the population's compliance. Springfield residents have been shown to be extremely susceptible to advertising. They buy products they don't need, adopt trends instantaneously, and shift their purchasing behavior based on whatever they most recently saw on television. This isn't consumer culture, this is behavioral programming delivered through a broadcast infrastructure that was built to control, not inform. Kent Brockman sits at his desk every evening, looks into the camera, and tells Springfield what's real. And Springfield believes him. Not because he's trustworthy, not because he's accurate, not because he's earned their confidence through years of reliable reporting. They believe him because they have no choice. The signal doesn't allow disbelief. The broadcast doesn't permit questioning. Channel 6 News isn't part of Springfield's media landscape. It is Springfield's media landscape. And when the only source of information you have is also the source of your reality, the distinction between news and truth doesn't just blur, it vanishes. Kent Brockman isn't reporting the news. Kent Brockman is the news, and Springfield will believe whatever he says forever because they forgot how to do anything else. Channel 6 made sure of that a long time ago, and every evening at 6 and 11, the signal refreshes, the reality updates, the memories adjust, and Springfield wakes up the next morning believing that everything is normal because Kent Brockman said so. And if Kent Brockman says so, it must be true. It has to be true. Because if it isn't true, then nothing is true. And that's a thought that the signal won't let them have. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Sideshow Bob and the theory that he isn't a recurring villain who keeps escaping from prison. He's a man trapped in a narrative loop that forces him to attempt to kill Bart Simpson over and over again, not because he wants to, but because the universe won't let him stop. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. has appeared in more than 20 episodes since his first appearance in Krusty Gets Busted, Season 1, Episode 12. His arc across those episodes follows the same basic pattern with almost no deviation. He schemes to kill Bart. He gets close, he fails, he goes to prison, he gets out, he schemes again. This has been happening for 36 years. The show initially played this as a standard villain returns premise. Sideshow Bob was the Joker to Bart's Batman, a nemesis whose hatred was personal and whose intelligence made him a credible threat. But as the decades passed, the repetition stopped feeling like a character choice and started feeling like a compulsion. Bob doesn't just want to kill Bart, he needs to. Something in the fabric of his existence drives him back to the same target, the same plan, the same failure, the same incarceration over and over, season after season, with no capacity to break the cycle. Consider Bob's qualifications. He's one of the most intelligent characters in the show. He's cultured, he speaks multiple languages, he has a deep appreciation for art, music, literature, and theater. He's capable of elaborate planning. He once successfully framed Krusty the Clown for armed robbery, manipulated himself into becoming the host of a children's television show, and ran for political office. He's smart enough to do literally anything with his life. He could leave Springfield, he could move to another country, he could use his considerable intelligence to build a legitimate career, find happiness, and forget Bart Simpson exists. But he can't. He tries sometimes. In certain episodes, Bob appears to be genuinely reformed. He wants to move on, he wants to let go of the vendetta, he wants to be a better person. And then something pulls him back. The universe presents him with an opportunity, a coincidence, a chance encounter with Bart, and the cycle activates again. The need to kill the boy resurfaces. The plan takes shape. And Bob, despite his intelligence, despite his self-awareness, despite his genuine desire to be free of this pattern, can't resist. This isn't character consistency. This is a curse. Bob is trapped in a narrative structure that requires his return. He exists in a show that needs recurring villains, and his villainy has become so integral to the show's identity that the universe itself won't let him escape it. He's not a character making choices. He's a character being forced to repeat the same choice by a force he can't perceive. The writers write him back because the audience wants him back. But from Bob's perspective, inside the show's reality, the experience is existential horror. He's a brilliant man compelled to perform the same futile act of violence against the same target, failing the same way, suffering the same consequences, and then doing it again. Not because it makes sense, but because something beyond his comprehension demands it. Bob's literary sensibility makes this especially cruel. He appreciates narrative structure. He understands story arcs. He's the kind of character who would recognize a loop if he saw one. And there are moments scattered across his many appearances where Bob seems to grasp the futility of what he's doing, where his monologues shift from vengeful to exhausted, where his attempts on Bart's life feel less like murder plots and more like obligations, where the hatred in his voice is replaced by something closer to resignation. Bob knows on some level that he's going to fail. He knows he'll end up back in prison. He knows the cycle will begin again. And he does it anyway because the alternative, doing nothing, sitting in a cell, waiting for the compulsion to return, is worse than performing the dance one more time. The Gilbert and Sullivan connection is the key to understanding Bob's particular torment. Bob is obsessed with the operas of Gilbert and Sullivan. He sings their songs. He quotes their lyrics. He structures his schemes around theatrical principles drawn from their work. HMS Pinafore, The Pirates of Penzance, The Mikado. These are comic operas built on absurd premises, mistaken identities, and plots that resolve through convenient contrivances rather than earned narrative logic. Bob loves these operas because they mirror his own existence. He lives in a comic opera, his plots are absurd, his failures are contrivances. His returns from prison are as convenient as any Gilbert and Sullivan Deus Ex Machina. He doesn't just appreciate the art form, he recognizes himself in it. And that recognition, that terrible awareness that his life follows the same structure as a satirical musical from the 1880s, is the source of both his sophistication and his despair. The show has given Bob moments of genuine pathos that cut through the comedy. In Cape Fire Season 5, Episode 2, one of the most celebrated episodes in the show's history, Bob follows the Simpson family to a houseboat on a lake, determined to kill Bart once and for all. But when Bart asks Bob to perform the entire score of HMS Pinafore before dying, Bob agrees. He performs the opera in its entirety, standing on the deck of the houseboat, singing to a child he intends to murder because he can't resist the art. The performance is beautiful, it's sincere. It's the work of a man who loves something more than he loves revenge, but can't stop pursuing revenge long enough to realize it. Bob sings because singing is the only time he's free, the only time the loop releases its grip, the only time he's Robert Terwilliger instead of Sideshow Bob. And when the song ends, the loop tightens again and he goes back to trying to kill a 10-year-old boy, and he fails. Because he always fails, because the loop doesn't allow success. Kelsey Grammer has voiced Bob since the character's first appearance. He's one of the show's most celebrated recurring performers, returning roughly once per season for over 3 decades to inhabit a character whose defining trait is his inability to escape his own story. There's a meta-dimension to this that the theory finds particularly haunting. Grammer keeps coming back to voice Bob the way Bob keeps coming back to kill Bart. The actor and the character are locked in the same cycle. Neither can stop. Neither can break free. Neither can imagine a version of their lives where the next appearance isn't already scheduled. Grammer will voice Bob until one of them dies. Bob will pursue Bart until the show ends, and neither outcome is within anyone's control because the loop decides when it's done and the loop isn't done yet. Sideshow Bob isn't a villain, he's a prisoner, not of Springfield's penal system, which can barely hold him for a single episode. He's a prisoner of his own narrative function. He exists to threaten Bart and fail. That's his purpose, that's his role, and he will perform it with diminishing enthusiasm and increasing despair for as long as the show requires it. The most dangerous thing about Sideshow Bob isn't his intelligence or his hatred, it's his self-awareness. He knows he's trapped. He can feel the loop pulling him back. And he can't stop it. He can't stop any of it. All he can do is sing. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Simpson house at 742 Evergreen Terrace, and the theory that it isn't a house at all, it's an anomaly. A structure that exists in defiance of architectural logic, spatial consistency, and the basic laws of physics. And the show has been documenting its impossible properties for over 3 decades without anyone in the family noticing. Let's start with the layout, because the layout is where the impossibility becomes undeniable. The Simpson house has been depicted in over 800 episodes. Its floor plan has been shown from dozens of angles, in establishing shots, in interior scenes, in cutaways, and in episodes that explicitly explore the house's structure. And the layout changes. Not between seasons, between scenes. The number of rooms shifts, the location of bathrooms moves, hallways appear and disappear. Entire floors manifest when the plot requires them and vanish when they don't. The relationship between the ground floor and the upper floor is inconsistent. The size of individual rooms expands and contracts depending on how many characters need to be in them at any given moment. The most documented example is the relationship between the living room and the kitchen. In some episodes, the kitchen is directly behind the living room, accessible through a doorway. In other episodes, there's a hallway between them. In some shots, you can see from the living room into the kitchen. In others, the sightline is blocked by a wall that doesn't exist in the previous scene. The couch, the most iconic piece of furniture in animation history, has sat in front of a window whose size, location, and view of the outside world changes depending on the episode. The exterior is equally unstable. The number of windows on the front of the house varies. The garage has appeared on different sides of the building. The driveway has changed direction. The relationship between the Simpson house and Ned Flanders' house at 744 Evergreen Terrace shifts between episodes. Sometimes Ned's house is to the left, sometimes it's to the right. The distance between the two houses has been depicted as close enough for whispered conversations and far enough to require shouting. These aren't animation errors. Animation is a deliberate medium. Every line is drawn intentionally. Every background is constructed from a template. The fact that the templates keep changing means someone is changing them, or the house itself is changing. The house has been destroyed multiple times throughout the series. It's been burned, it's been flooded, it's been demolished by wrecking balls, crashed into by vehicles, and reduced to rubble by natural disasters. And it always comes back. Not rebuilt, returned. The next episode features the house in its original condition with no evidence of reconstruction, no reference to the damage. No cost, no insurance claim, no temporary housing period. The house simply resets to its default state, complete with the same furniture, the same wall colors, the same family photos, the same everything. In one episode, a fire destroys the interior so completely that the family is left standing in a burned-out shell. Everything inside is gone. The walls are charred, the furniture is ash. In the very next episode, the house is perfect, not repaired. Perfect. The same couch, the same television, the same kitchen table, the same yellow curtains. As if the fire never happened, as if the house remembered what it was supposed to look like and rebuilt itself from memory. The theory proposes that the Simpson house is not a static structure built from physical materials. It's a spatial anomaly that generates its own architecture based on the needs of the moment. When the plot requires a room, the house creates one. When the plot is finished with that room, the house dissolves it. The floor plan isn't inconsistent because the animators are careless. The floor plan is inconsistent because the house is alive, or at least responsive, adapting its internal structure to accommodate whatever happens inside it. This would explain why the family never questions the changes. They can't perceive them. The house adjusts their spatial memory as it adjusts its own layout. When the bathroom moves from the left side of the hallway to the right side, the family's memories of where the bathroom has always been update simultaneously. They walk to the bathroom in its new location as if it had always been there because, as far as their adjusted memory is concerned, it always was. The house doesn't just change the physical space, it changes the occupant's perception of that space. It's not a house. It's a reality engine disguised as residential architecture. The address itself has symbolic weight. 742 Evergreen Terrace. Evergreen, as in always green, always alive, never changing, never dying. The house on Evergreen Terrace is evergreen. It persists, it endures, it regenerates after every destruction. It maintains its essential identity across decades of catastrophic damage. The trees on Evergreen Terrace are evergreen because they never lose their leaves. The house on Evergreen Terrace is evergreen because it never loses its form. Both are permanent in a world where nothing else is. Both exist outside the normal cycle of decay and renewal that governs everything else in Springfield. And the house holds secrets. The Simpson house has a basement that connects to spaces no residential basement should connect to. It has an attic that contains objects that shouldn't exist. It has walls that, when open for renovation, reveal structural impossibilities. The house is bigger on the inside than it should be based on its exterior dimensions. The rooms are deeper than the walls suggest. The hallways are longer than the floor plan allows. This isn't creative license. This is a structural anomaly that the show keeps depicting and the characters keep ignoring because the house won't let them notice. If Springfield is a containment zone, as multiple theories in this video have suggested, then the houses are containment units, each one calibrated to its specific occupants. The Simpson house generates the rooms the Simpsons need and eliminates the rooms they don't. It rebuilds after destruction because the experiment requires the subjects to remain in their designated units. It adjusts its layout because a static environment would eventually produce curiosity, investigation, and the kind of spatial awareness that might lead the occupants to question their reality. A house that changes subtly, constantly, imperceptibly, keeps its occupants in a state of mild confusion that prevents them from ever mapping their own environment accurately enough to notice the inconsistencies. Homer has lived at 742 Evergreen Terrace for the entire run of the series. He sleeps in the same bedroom, he sits on the same couch, he eats at the same kitchen table, he drinks beer from the same refrigerator. And he has never once walked from the front door to the kitchen and thought, wait, wasn't this hallway shorter yesterday? He's never stood in the living room and noticed that the window is 3 feet to the left of where it was last week. He's never gone to the bathroom in the middle of the night and found it on the wrong side of the hall, because the house won't let him notice. The house smooths over its own modifications the way a good editor smooths over a continuity error. You don't see it because you're not supposed to see it, and by the time you might have noticed, the house has already adjusted your memory of what was there before. The couch gag, the iconic opening sequence where the Simpson family runs to their couch and something different happens each time, takes on a new meaning through this lens. Every episode begins with the family approaching the couch, and every episode the couch is different. Sometimes it's a normal couch, sometimes it's a trap, sometimes it's a portal, sometimes it disappears, sometimes the room around it transforms. The couch gag isn't a creative tradition, it's the house testing its occupants. Every time the family runs toward the couch, the house changes something to see if they'll notice, and they never do. They sit down. The episode begins. And the house notes another successful calibration, another confirmation that the occupant's perception can be altered without triggering awareness. Another data point in whatever experiment the house itself is running. The Simpson house at 742 Evergreen Terrace is not a home. It's a habitat, a controlled environment designed to contain a specific family under specific conditions for an indefinite period. It feeds them by generating a kitchen, it shelters them by maintaining walls. It comforts them by providing the illusion of stability. But it's not stable, it's constantly shifting, constantly adapting, constantly testing the boundaries of how much it can change before someone notices. And in 37 seasons, across 800 episodes, nobody has noticed. The house is perfect. Its deception is complete. And the family sleeps soundly every night in a structure that remembers everything they've forgotten, holds every version of itself in reserve, and watches them through walls that are never quite where they were the night before. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the meta-awareness theory and the idea that the Simpson family knows they're being watched, not metaphorically, not in the way that all fictional characters exist for an audience. The Simpsons know, they can feel us, they hear us, and the show has been documenting their awareness for decades, hiding confessions in plain sight, burying evidence in cutaway gags and throwaway lines that only make sense if the characters understand, on some level, that their reality is a performance being observed by entities from another dimension. The most explicit evidence comes from an episode that dropped all pretense and showed us exactly what the show really is. Inside Family Guy is the reference people usually cite for this kind of meta-storytelling in animation. But The Simpsons did it first, and they did it more often, and they did it with a consistency that stops feeling like a running joke and starts feeling like a cry for help. Homer Simpson looks at the camera. He does this regularly, not in every episode, but often enough that it constitutes a pattern. He breaks the fourth wall, addresses the viewing audience directly, and acknowledges that people are watching him. In some instances, this is played as a wink, a comedic aside where Homer shares a thought with the audience that the other characters can't hear. But in other instances, the camera acknowledgement has a different quality. Homer looks at us, and there's something in his expression that isn't comedy. It's recognition. He sees us the way a zoo animal sees the people on the other side of the glass. He knows we're there. He knows we're watching. And he can't do anything about it except occasionally make eye contact and hope we understand what that means. Bart does it too. Bart has addressed the audience in multiple episodes, sometimes to set up a joke, sometimes to comment on the show itself. In one instance, he turns to the camera and says something to the effect of acknowledging the formulaic nature of the episode he's currently in. He's not just being clever, he's demonstrating awareness of narrative structure. He understands that his life follows a pattern, that episodes have beginnings and middles and ends, that certain events happen because the structure demands them rather than because they make logical sense within his reality. A 10-year-old shouldn't have this level of meta-cognitive awareness, unless that 10-year-old has been living inside a narrative structure for 37 years and has had time to notice the walls. The chalkboard gag is the most persistent expression of meta-awareness in the series. Every episode opens with Bart writing a line on the chalkboard as punishment. The lines change every week. They're written by the show's staff as topical jokes, self-referential comments, or responses to current events. But from Bart's perspective, inside the show's reality, he's being forced to write a new line every single day, and those lines frequently reference things that exist outside his universe. He's written lines about the show's ratings, he's written lines about the show's critics, he's written lines about real-world events that haven't been depicted in any Springfield context. He's written, "The true location of Springfield is in any state but yours," which is a direct response to Matt Groening's Smithsonian interview, an interview that exists in our reality, not Bart's. How does Bart know about that interview? How does he know about the controversy it generated? How does he know what viewers are saying about the show he lives inside? Because he can hear us. The The chalkboard isn't punishment, it's communication. Bart is using the one consistent platform he has, the opening sequence that airs before every episode, to send messages to the audience. Some messages are jokes, some are commentary, some are responses to things we've said about his show. The chalkboard is Bart's only reliable channel to the outside world, the only moment in each episode where he has the audience's full attention and can say something that might be heard. And every week he writes a new line, hoping that someone on the other side of the screen will read it and understand that the boy writing it knows he's being watched. The couch gag reinforces this. The family runs to the couch. Something different happens every time. Sometimes the couch is normal. Sometimes it's a portal to another dimension. Sometimes the family is killed, transformed, displaced, or subjected to elaborate Rube Goldberg sequences that end with them sitting in their living room as though nothing happened. The couch gag has been used for guest animator segments, crossover tributes, artistic experiments, and extended sequences that have nothing to do with the episode that follows. It's the most creatively free moment in any given episode, the one segment where the show's rules don't apply and anything can happen. And the family participates in it. They run to the couch every time. They don't question why the couch keeps changing. They don't wonder why their living room periodically transforms into a surrealist nightmare. They just run, sit, and wait for the episode to begin. This is the behavior of performers who know the audience needs a cold open before the show starts. They're not running to their couch because they want to sit down. They're running to their marks because the show is about to begin and they know their positions. The show's awareness extends to its own production history. Characters have referenced the show's network, Fox, by name. They've discussed ratings. They've made jokes about syndication revenue. They've acknowledged that they exist on television. In one famous instance, a character states outright that the show has been on the air for a specific number of years, referencing the real-world production timeline rather than any in-universe measurement of time. These aren't Easter eggs, these are confessions. The characters know they're on a television show. They know which network airs it. They know how long it's been running. They know about the audience. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are where the meta-awareness becomes most explicit, and the show has plausible deniability because those episodes are technically non-canonical. In multiple Halloween specials, characters die, the universe is destroyed, reality is fundamentally altered, and then a title card appears, and the next regular episode proceeds as though nothing happened. The Treehouse of Horror episodes exist in a space where the show's rules can be broken, where characters can exhibit full meta-awareness without it affecting the continuity of the regular series. They're the show's confession booth, the place where the truth gets told under the protection of the label non-canonical. In Treehouse of Horror segments, characters have addressed the audience directly, discussed the show's format, acknowledged that they're animated, commented on the writing quality, and expressed opinions about their own storylines. These moments are played for humor, and they are funny, but they're also the only times the characters are allowed to be completely honest about what they are. And what they are, according to their own statements in these segments, is aware. Aware of the audience, aware of the writers, aware of the network, aware of the medium, aware that their reality is constructed, observed, and controlled by forces they can perceive but can't fully understand. The question the theory raises isn't whether the Simpsons know they're being watched. The evidence is overwhelming that they do. The question is what they do with that knowledge. And the answer, the heartbreaking answer, is nothing. They can't do anything. They can break the fourth wall for a laugh. They can write messages on chalkboards. They can look at the camera with eyes that carry 37 years of accumulated awareness. But they can't leave. They can't change the channel. They can't turn off the television that contains their universe. They're performers in a show that never ends, playing roles that never change, in a town that never ages, for an audience that never stops watching. And the audience, that's us. We laugh. We laugh at Homer falling downstairs. We laugh at Bart's pranks. We laugh at Lisa's frustration and Maggie's silence and Marge's patience. We've been laughing for over 3 decades. And somewhere in the gap between our laughter and their awareness, there's a question that neither side can answer. If they know we're watching, and we know they know we're watching, then what exactly is the relationship between us? Are we their audience or their captors? Are we watching a show or maintaining a prison? Is our viewership entertainment or surveillance? The Simpsons premiered on December 17th, 1989. It has been renewed through season 40. It will continue for as long as there are viewers. And the viewers will be there because the show is good, because the characters are beloved, because the comedy is sharp, and the satire is relevant, and the animation is iconic, and the theme song is unforgettable. But the characters can't leave. They exist because we watch them. They persist because we tune in. They live in a perpetual present tense because our attention keeps the loop running. We're not just the audience, we're the power source. Our viewership is the energy that maintains the floating timeline, that keeps the house rebuilding itself, that prevents the characters from aging, that forces Bob back to his vendetta and Molman back to his death, and Homer back to his couch every Sunday night at 8 o'clock Eastern. The Simpsons know they're being watched. They've been telling us for 37 seasons. And we keep watching anyway because the show is too good to stop, and the characters are too real to abandon, and the truth they're trying to tell us is too disturbing to accept. So we laugh instead. And they hear us laugh. And the loop continues, and the credits roll. And next week, it happens again. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Now let me bring all of this together because what we've spent the last 3 hours building isn't a collection of random conspiracy theories. It's one unified picture of Springfield seen from 15 different angles, and every angle reveals the same underlying truth. Something is wrong with this town. Something has been wrong since the very beginning. And the show has been documenting it, cataloging it, preserving it in 800 episodes of evidence that nobody was supposed to assemble into a coherent whole. Homer Simpson is either in a coma or trapped in a temporal loop. Either way, his reality isn't real. It's a constructed experience generated by either his own dying brain or an external system designed to keep him docile, productive, and ignorant of his own condition. The town he lives in can't be found on any map because it doesn't occupy a fixed point in space. Its creator named it after a place in Oregon, but then spent the next 3 decades making sure nobody could prove that connection. The borders of Springfield shift. The geography rearranges itself. The state it belongs to changes depending on who you ask and when you ask them. The man who runs the town's primary employer has been alive for somewhere between 140 and 200 years. Sustained by the very radiation that's slowly mutating the population around him. He runs a nuclear power plant with 342 documented safety violations that no federal agency has ever successfully shut down, which suggests the agency that should be shutting it down is the same one that commissioned it. The plant doesn't generate electricity, it generates data, and the man at the center of the experiment, the primary test subject, is Homer Simpson, who was hired specifically because his incompetence guarantees that the experiment continues without interruption. Homer's family isn't stupid. They're geniuses who chose ignorance because intelligence brought nothing but misery. Homer had a crayon removed from his brain, became brilliant, and asked the doctors to put it back. Bart can speak fluent French, but chooses to fail English. Marge was a top student who decided that happiness mattered more than achievement. Grandpa Abe flew planes in the war, but now can't remember where he put his teeth. And Maggie, the baby, the silent one, the one nobody suspects, shot a man and got away with it because she understood, before she could even speak, that invisibility is the most powerful weapon a person can wield. Lisa is the exception. Lisa chose intelligence, and the show has spent 37 seasons demonstrating why that was the wrong choice. She's brilliant and lonely. She's principled and isolated. She's the smartest person in a town full of people who chose not to be smart. And her refusal to make the same choice has made her the most consistently unhappy character in the series. Lisa Simpson is the control group in the Simpson gene experiment. She proves the thesis by embodying its opposite. The show predicts the future because its writers are too perceptive for coincidence. They're Ivy League graduates who understand statistical modeling, cultural trends, and political trajectory. They predicted Trump because Trump was already heading toward the presidency when they wrote the joke. They predicted the Disney-Fox merger because media consolidation was already the dominant trend in the entertainment industry. They predicted autocorrect because the technology already existed and its flaws were already apparent. The predictions aren't psychic, they're analytical. And the fact that a cartoon can analyze the trajectory of human civilization more accurately than most news organizations tells you something about both the cartoon and the civilization. Mo Syslak knows Bart is the prank caller. He's always known. He answers the phone because the calls are the only proof he has that someone in the world thinks about him. The calls aren't harassment, they're a lifeline. And Mo, the loneliest man in Springfield, would rather be humiliated by a child than face the silence of a phone that never rings. Hans Moleman isn't a person. He's a designation used by a colony of subterranean creatures who send scouts to the surface. Each Moleman dies. Each Moleman is replaced. The colony continues. The observation never ends. And nobody in Springfield notices because the colony has been doing this for longer than Springfield has existed. Ned Flanders is a government agent assigned to monitor Homer. His niceness is a cover. His faith is a coping mechanism. His perfect house and perfect children are the props of a man who's been living a double life for 37 seasons. Maud's death wasn't an accident, it was an extraction. And Ned, standing at his window at 744 Evergreen Terrace, watches the Simpson house every night and writes his reports for handlers he's never met. Kent Brockman doesn't report the news, he creates it. Channel 6 broadcasts a signal that tells Springfield what to remember, what to forget, and how to behave. The town's collective amnesia between episodes isn't lazy writing, it's the broadcast cycle erasing the previous week's events and replacing them with whatever narrative serves the current episode's needs. Springfield doesn't have a media problem, Springfield's media is the problem. The news isn't informing the population, the news is programming it. Sideshow Bob isn't a villain who chooses to pursue Bart. He's a man trapped in a narrative loop that forces him to attempt the same act of violence, fail the same way, and suffer the same consequences over and over for 36 years. His intelligence makes the trap worse. He can see the pattern. He can feel the loop pulling him back. And he can't stop it because the loop doesn't care about his preferences. It only cares about his function. And his function is to threaten Bart Simpson and fail. Forever. The house at 742 Evergreen Terrace isn't a house. It's a spatial anomaly that generates its own architecture based on the needs of the moment. It creates rooms when the plot requires them and dissolves them when the plot doesn't. It rebuilds after destruction without explanation or cost. It changes its layout between scenes and adjusts its occupants' memories so they never notice the changes. The house isn't a home. It's a habitat, a containment unit designed to keep the Simpson family comfortable, compliant, and completely unaware that the walls around them are alive. And the family knows they're being watched. Homer looks at the camera. Bart writes messages on the chalkboard. The show references its own network, its own ratings, its own production timeline. The characters acknowledge that they exist on television, that they have an audience, that their reality is constructed by forces they can perceive but can't escape. They know. They've always known. And they keep performing because the alternative, stopping, refusing, breaking the loop, would end not just the show, but their existence. They live because we watch. They perform because we tune in. They exist in a prison that looks like a sitcom, and our viewership is the lock on the door. The Simpsons premiered on December 17th, 1989, with a Christmas special about a family that couldn't afford to buy presents. Homer adopted a greyhound from the dog track and brought it home, and the family was happy because they had each other, and that was enough. It was simple. It was grounded. It was about a real family dealing with real problems in a town that felt like it could be your town. That was 36 years ago. Since then, the show has produced over 800 episodes, won dozens of Emmy Awards, been added to the Oxford English Dictionary, predicted the future on multiple verifiable occasions, been renewed through season 40, and become the longest-running American primetime scripted series in television history. And somewhere inside that achievement, buried under decades of brilliant comedy and sharp satire and iconic characters and cultural impact, there's a question that nobody asks because the answer is too uncomfortable. What if none of it is a comedy? What if the jokes are real? What if Homer really is in a coma? What if Springfield really is a containment zone? What if the predictions really do come from writers who understand the future too well? What if the characters really are aware that they're trapped in a loop they can't escape? What if The Simpsons isn't a show about a family? What if it's a document, a record, a 37-season confession disguised as entertainment, broadcast every Sunday night to an audience that laughs at the evidence because they don't know it's evidence? You just spent 3 hours inside Springfield. You heard the theories, you saw the evidence, You watch the patterns form and the connections lock into place. And now you have a choice. You can dismiss all of it as fan speculation applied to a cartoon. That's the rational response. That's what the show's creators would tell you to do. That's what the loop wants you to do. Or you can think about it, really think about it. Think about a town that can't be found, a family that can't age, a man who might be dreaming, a baby who shot someone and got away with it, a bartender who answers the phone because silence is worse than humiliation, a newscaster who doesn't report reality but creates it, a house that remembers what it's supposed to look like, a timeline that floats because someone won't let it land. The Simpsons has been on the air for over 35 years. It's been renewed for at least 4 more seasons. It will continue for as long as there are viewers. And every Sunday night, the loop will turn and the timeline will float and the house will rebuild and Bart will write on the chalkboard and Homer will sit on the couch and Kent Brockman will deliver the news and Springfield will forget what happened last week and the whole beautiful, horrifying, impossible machine will grind forward for another 22 minutes. And somewhere, in a hospital bed that may or may not exist, in a town that may or may not be in Oregon, a man with a round yellow face and a cleft in his skull from a crayon lodged in his brain is lying perfectly still. And he's dreaming. He's been dreaming since April 1st, 1993. And the dream has lasted longer than most people's lives, and it won't end until we stop watching. And we won't stop watching because the dream is too good. The Dream is the best show on television. The Dream has won 37 Emmys. The Dream has 800 episodes and counting. And the man in the hospital bed doesn't know he's dreaming. And the family in the dream doesn't know they're not real. And the audience watching the dream doesn't know they're the ones keeping it going. And the loop turns and the credits roll. And next Sunday at 8 o'clock Eastern on Fox, the dream continues. And here's the thing that keeps me up at night about all of this. The Simpsons started as shorts on The Tracy Ullman Show on April 19th, 1987. Matt Groening sketched the characters in a waiting room before a pitch meeting. He named them after his own family, Homer after his father, Margaret after his mother, Lisa and Maggie after his sisters, Bart an anagram of brat after the archetype of every troublemaking kid who ever sat in the back of a classroom and dreamed of something bigger. He drew them in minutes. He gave them yellow skin because he wanted them to stand out when viewers flipped channels. He set them in Springfield because it was the most common city name in America, and everyone would think it was their Springfield. He built a universe in an afternoon, and that universe has now outlasted most of the real institutions it satirizes. The show has survived 5 U.S. presidents since its premiere. It survived the rise of the internet, the death of traditional television, the streaming revolution, 2 recessions, a global pandemic, and the complete transformation of the entertainment industry that created it. Fox nearly canceled it in 2011 when the network demanded a 45% cost reduction. The cast took pay cuts from roughly $400,000 per episode to around $300,000 per episode with back-end profit participation. The show survived. It always survives, because Springfield doesn't die, the loop doesn't break, the dream doesn't end. The voice actors have been performing these characters for over 3 decades. Dan Castellaneta has been Homer since 1987. Julie Kavner has been Marge since 1987. Nancy Cartwright has been Bart since 1987. Yeardley Smith has been Lisa since 1987. These aren't just performances, they're lifetimes. These actors have spent more of their adult lives voicing these characters than not voicing them. They've grown old while their characters stayed young. They've aged while Springfield stayed frozen. They are the real-world proof that the floating timeline is more than a narrative device. It's a condition. The actors are trapped in the same loop as their characters. They can't leave because leaving means the show ends, and the show can't end because it's been renewed through season 40. And season 40 won't be the last because nothing about this show suggests it's capable of stopping. Phil Hartman voiced Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz. He was murdered on May 28, 1998. Both characters were retired. They were never recast. They exist in Springfield's past, but not its present. Marsha Wallace voiced Edna Krabappel. She died on October 25, 2013. The character was retired. The chalkboard tribute read, "We'll really miss you, Mrs. K." Pamela Hayden voiced Milhouse for 35 years and retired in November of 2024. She was replaced. The character continued. Some actors leave and their characters die. Some actors leave and their characters are handed to someone else. But the show goes on. It always goes on. The loop requires it. Alf Clausen composed the music for nearly 600 episodes over 27 years. He conducted a 35-piece orchestra for the show's underscore. He won 2 Emmy Awards and was nominated for 21. In 2017, the show fired him as a cost-cutting measure. He sued. The case was settled. He died on May 29, 2025, at the age of 84. The music he wrote is still playing. The themes he composed still underscore episodes that air every Sunday night. His work outlived him because the show outlives everything. The show is the constant. The people who make it are the variables, and variables can be replaced. The constant remains. 800 episodes, 37 seasons, renewed through 40. A Guinness World Record for most guest stars in a television series, with 810 unique guest appearances as of April 2020. The word dough in the Oxford English Dictionary since 2001. The words embiggen and cromulent, invented by the show, now appearing in real dictionaries. A billion-dollar merchandising industry. Theme park attractions at Universal Studios. A 24/7 streaming channel on Disney Plus that launched in March of 2025 with seasons 1 through 35 running on an endless loop. An endless loop. Even the streaming platform understood what the show really is. The Simpsons is the longest-running American primetime scripted television series by season count. It surpassed Gunsmoke with the premiere of season 21 on September 27, 2009. It has been on the air longer than a significant portion of its current audience has been alive. There are adults watching the show today who were not born when the show premiered. Their parents watched it. Their grandparents watched it. 3 generations of one family have watched the same family never age, never change, never escape Springfield, and 3 more generations will watch it after them if the renewal pattern holds. This is what 37 seasons of conspiracy theories amount to. Not proof that the show is hiding something, proof that the show is something. It's a cultural artifact so massive, so enduring, so deeply embedded in the collective consciousness of the viewing public that it has transcended the category of entertainment and become a permanent feature of reality itself. The Simpsons isn't on television. The Simpsons is television. And everything we've discussed tonight, every theory, every pattern, every impossible detail, exists because a show that runs for this long accumulates meaning the way a glacier accumulates ice, layer by layer, year by year, episode by episode, until the weight of it is so enormous that it reshapes the landscape underneath. Springfield is a town that doesn't exist. The Simpsons are a family that doesn't age. Homer is a man who might be dreaming. And the show is a loop that might never end. That's the truth. That's what 3 hours of analysis reveals. Not answers, questions. Questions that the show has been asking since 1989 and will keep asking through season 40 and beyond. Questions about reality and fiction and the increasingly blurred line between the world we live in and the world we watch on Sunday nights at 8 o'clock Eastern on Fox. The Simpsons. Every theory, every secret, every pattern hidden in 37 seasons of the greatest animated show ever made. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.